Overthinking simple decisions. Overthinking simple decisions is a silent trap that disguises itself as intelligence, caution, and responsibility. It feels productive, even virtuous, but underneath it quietly drains momentum and confidence. What should be a small choice turns into an exhausting mental loop, where every possible outcome is analyzed, questioned, and reanalyzed until the decision itself feels heavy and dangerous. This trap works by exploiting the brain's fear of regret. The mind convinces you that if you think long enough, you can eliminate risk entirely, but instead of clarity, you get paralysis. The more you think, the more invisible threats appear, and the decision begins to feel larger than it ever was. A simple action becomes a test of identity, intelligence, and future success. Over time, this creates a subtle emotional erosion. You start doubting your instincts. You stop trusting yourself to choose correctly. Each delayed decision reinforces the belief that acting quickly is reckless, and hesitation becomes your default. You feel busy, mentally occupied, but nothing actually moves forward. Progress is replaced by preparation, and preparation becomes a hiding place. The emotional cost is quiet but devastating. Opportunities pass while you are still thinking. Confidence fades because confidence is built through action, not contemplation. The mind becomes a courtroom where every choice is on trial and no verdict is ever reached. What hurts most is the growing awareness that life is happening without you while you're still deciding. Overthinking doesn't protect you from mistakes. It protects you from responsibility. And the longer you stay trapped in your head, the harder it becomes to step back into motion, waiting for perfect conditions. Waiting for perfect conditions is a comforting illusion that convinces you you're being patient, strategic, and disciplined, when in reality, you're postponing your own life. This trap feels safe because it removes urgency. You tell yourself you'll start when the timing is right, when you're more prepared, more confident, more equipped. Until then, you observe, plan, and wait, believing readiness is something that arrives from the outside. The mind loves this trap because it promises certainty. It whispers that once everything aligns, action will feel natural and effortless. But perfect conditions never arrive. Life stays messy, unpredictable, and incomplete. By waiting, you slowly train your brain to associate action with comfort and discomfort with danger. The moment conditions aren't ideal, you pause again, reinforcing hesitation as a habit. Emotionally, this trap is corrosive. Each delay creates quiet frustration, not loud enough to force change, but persistent enough to drain self-respect. You watch others move forward and assume they had better circumstances, not realizing they acted in spite of uncertainty. Over time, waiting becomes identity. You stop seeing yourself as someone who acts and start seeing yourself as someone who prepares. The most painful part is the false hope. You keep believing your moment is coming, that someday things will click. But while you're waiting for permission from reality, reality keeps moving. Confidence fades because confidence is built by starting before you're ready. Momentum dies because momentum only exists after movement. Waiting for perfect conditions doesn't protect you from failure. It quietly ensures you never fully begin. Confusing intelligence with wisdom. Confusing intelligence with wisdom is a deeply seductive trap because it flatters the ego while slowly hollowing out judgment. Intelligence feels sharp, fast, impressive. It gathers information, spots patterns, and explains the world with precision. Wisdom, on the other hand, is slower, heavier, and often uncomfortable. When the two are mistaken for each other, knowledge becomes a substitute for growth. This trap convinces you that understanding something means you've mastered it. You can explain your problems in detail, articulate your flaws, and analyze your behavior with surgical clarity, yet nothing actually changes. The mind feels accomplished because it has named the issue, but wisdom demands something more painful: action, restraint, and humility. Intelligence asks why, while wisdom asks what now. Emotionally, this creates a dangerous sense of superiority mixed with stagnation. You begin to trust your thoughts more than your experiences. Advice from others feels unnecessary because you already see the problem. But seeing isn't the same as living differently. Over time, life keeps delivering the same lessons in harsher ways because insight without application has no weight. The real damage appears quietly. Relationships strain because being right replaces being kind. Patterns repeat because insight replaces discipline. You become excellent at explaining your failures and terrible at correcting them. Intelligence builds mental castles, but wisdom is built through scars, repetition, and restraint. When intelligence leads without wisdom, the mind grows louder while life stays the same, and the gap between what you know and who you are becomes impossible to ignore. Valuing knowledge over execution. Valuing knowledge over execution is a trap that feels noble, disciplined, and endlessly justifiable. Learning feels safe. It feels productive. Every new idea delivers a small hit of satisfaction, convincing you that progress is being made. But knowledge without action slowly becomes a form of self-deception, where understanding replaces movement and preparation replaces results. This trap works by rewarding the brain without demanding risk. Reading, researching, and thinking carry no consequences. Execution does. The moment you act, you expose yourself to failure, judgment, and discomfort. So the mind chooses accumulation over application. You keep telling yourself you're not ready yet, that one more insight will unlock clarity. Instead, the pile of knowledge grows while confidence shrinks. Emotionally, this creates a quiet tension. You know more than you use. You see solutions clearly but feel strangely unable to apply them. This gap becomes painful because self-respect is built through doing, not knowing. The more you learn without acting, the heavier inaction feels, and the harder it becomes to start. Knowledge turns from a tool into a shield. Over time, execution begins to feel intimidating, even foreign. You identify as someone who understands, not someone who builds. The world rewards visible output, but you remain invisible, stuck in potential. The most dangerous part is the illusion of progress. You feel advanced, informed, even ahead, yet nothing in your life reflects it. Knowledge was never meant to replace action. It was meant to serve it. Fear of being seen. Trying. Fear of being seen trying is a deeply human trap rooted in shame, pride, and the need to protect identity. It's the fear that effort will expose your limits, that struggle will make you look less capable, and that trying publicly risks being judged before you succeed. So instead of acting openly, you delay, hide, or only move when success feels guaranteed. This trap is powerful because it ties effort to weakness. You begin to believe that competent people shouldn't need to try hard, that struggle is something to conceal, not endure. The moment effort becomes visible, your self-image feels threatened. It feels safer to appear effortlessly capable than visibly imperfect. As a result, you only act in private or not at all. Emotionally, this creates isolation. You carry ambition quietly, suppress curiosity, and abandon opportunities that would require visible learning. You watch others grow while telling yourself you'll start once you're good enough to be seen. But growth never happens in hiding. Every skill, confidence, and breakthrough is built through awkward, visible effort. Over time, this fear tightens. You stop associating action with freedom and start associating it with exposure. The world becomes an audience instead of a playground. What hurts most is the regret of unrealized potential, knowing you could have grown if you had allowed yourself to look foolish for a while. Fear of being seen trying doesn't protect your reputation. It quietly ensures you never earn one worth having. Mistaking planning for progress. Mistaking planning for progress is a trap that feels structured, responsible, and intelligent, yet quietly keeps life frozen in place. Planning gives the comforting sensation of control. It feels like movement without risk, action without exposure. You organize, outline, schedule, and refine, believing that clarity will eventually transform into momentum on its own. This trap works because planning reduces anxiety. It creates the illusion that you're moving forward while avoiding the discomfort of real action. Execution demands uncertainty. Planning offers certainty without consequences. Each plan feels like a step, but it costs nothing to make and requires nothing to prove. The brain rewards you as if progress happened, even when nothing changed. Emotionally, this creates a subtle self-betrayal. You begin to trust your plans more than your actions. You feel productive, but unfulfilled. Days pass filled with preparation, yet outcomes remain the same. Over time, the gap between intention and reality grows, and so does the quiet frustration you can't quite explain. You know what to do, you've mapped it out perfectly, but something is missing. That missing piece is movement. Planning was never meant to replace doing. It was meant to support it. When planning becomes the goal, it becomes a hiding place from failure, judgment, and responsibility. You delay the moment where reality responds to your efforts, and the longer you stay in planning mode, the harder it becomes to shift into action, because starting now feels riskier than planning again. Needing certainty before acting. Needing certainty before acting is a trap that feels logical, responsible, and mature, yet it quietly strips life of momentum. It convinces you that action should only happen when outcomes are clear, risks are mapped, and doubt is eliminated. Until then, you wait, observe, and think, believing hesitation is wisdom and delay is discipline. This trap feeds on the fear of making the wrong move. The mind demands guarantees before commitment as if life were a controlled experiment, but certainty is rarely available in advance. Most clarity comes after action, not before it. By demanding certainty first, you reverse the natural order of growth and trap yourself in endless anticipation. Emotionally, this creates a chronic state of tension. You feel capable but stuck, aware but unmoving. Each postponed decision reinforces the belief that acting without full confidence is dangerous. Over time, uncertainty begins to feel intolerable, and inaction becomes your comfort zone. You don't avoid risk, you avoid responsibility for outcomes. The cost is subtle but severe. Confidence erodes because confidence is built by surviving uncertainty, not escaping it. Opportunities disappear while you're still calculating. Life rewards those willing to move with partial information while you wait for permission that never comes. Needing certainty before acting doesn't make you safer. It keeps you frozen at the edge of your potential, watching clarity pass you by. Intellectualizing emotions instead of feeling them. Intellectualizing emotions instead of feeling them is a sophisticated escape disguised as self-awareness. It sounds mature to explain your pain logically, to analyze your reactions, to label your emotions with precision. But beneath that calm language is often avoidance. Instead of experiencing what hurts, you turn feelings into concepts, keeping them at a safe mental distance. This trap forms when emotions feel overwhelming or inconvenient. Rather than allowing sadness, anger, or fear to move through the body, the mind steps in to translate them into theories. You don't feel hurt, you understand why it happened. You don't feel anger, you see both sides. This creates control, but it also creates numbness. The emotion doesn't disappear, it gets stored. Emotionally, this leads to a quiet disconnect. You can talk about your pain without ever releasing it. You sound composed while feeling empty. Over time, feelings become dull signals instead of lived experiences, and the body carries what the mind refuses to process. This often shows up as chronic tension, exhaustion, or sudden emotional outbursts that seem to come from nowhere. The danger is subtle. You begin to believe you're healed because you can explain yourself so well. But healing doesn't happen through insight alone. Emotions need to be felt to completion. When they aren't, they resurface in distorted ways, shaping behavior without your awareness. Intellectualizing emotions protects you from discomfort in the short term, but it robs you of emotional depth, intimacy, and clarity. You stay articulate, composed, and distant, while unresolved feelings quietly run your life from underneath. Believing potential guarantees success. Believing potential guarantees success is one of the most comforting and destructive traps the mind can fall into. Potential feels like a promise, something inherent and permanent, as if talent alone secures a future outcome. Being told you're gifted, smart, or capable creates an invisible cushion, making effort feel optional and urgency unnecessary. This trap works by shifting focus from action to identity. You begin to see success as something you deserve rather than something you must build. As long as potential exists, failure feels temporary, and effort can always be postponed. The mind tells you there's time, that you'll step up when it really matters. But potential unused quietly expires. Emotionally, this creates a fragile sense of self-worth. You protect the idea of what you could be instead of confronting what you are. Taking risks becomes dangerous because failure would challenge the story you've been living off. So you avoid situations that would truly test you, choosing comfort over proof. Over time, the gap between promise and reality becomes painful. Watching others surpass you hurts not because they're better, but because they acted. Potential begins to feel like a burden instead of a gift, a constant reminder of what you haven't done. Success was never guaranteed by what you're capable of. It's earned by what you repeatedly execute. And without action, potential doesn't lead to greatness. It quietly leads to regret. Avoiding discomfort through rationalization. Avoiding discomfort through rationalization is a trap that turns intelligence into a defense mechanism. Instead of facing what feels uncomfortable, the mind constructs explanations that make inaction feel reasonable, even necessary. You don't avoid the hard thing because you're afraid. You avoid it because it's not the right time, not efficient, or not aligned. The language sounds logical, but the motive is emotional. This trap works by soothing inner tension. Discomfort signals growth, risk, or confrontation, and the brain seeks relief. Rationalization provides that relief instantly. It reframes avoidance as wisdom, fear as discernment. Each explanation feels convincing because it is internally consistent, even if it quietly contradicts your deeper instincts. You begin to believe your own excuses. Emotionally, this creates stagnation masked as stability. You feel calm but not fulfilled, safe but not alive. Over time, the mind becomes skilled at protecting comfort, not building strength. Every avoided discomfort reinforces the belief that discomfort is dangerous rather than necessary. Growth starts to feel optional instead of essential. The damage compounds quietly. Opportunities shrink because courage is underused. Self-trust erodes because you sense the gap between what you say and what you feel. The hardest part is that rationalization robs you of urgency. Nothing seems wrong enough to change, yet nothing improves. Discomfort was never the enemy. It was the signal that something meaningful was waiting on the other side, and rationalization keeps you from ever reaching it. Equating busyness with productivity. Equating busyness with productivity is a deceptive trap that keeps you exhausted while convincing you you're making progress. Your days are full, your schedule packed, your mind constantly occupied. You're always doing something, responding to something, managing something. Yet when you pause, there's an uncomfortable question beneath the motion. What has actually changed? This trap thrives on visible effort. Busyness feels important. It creates the appearance of momentum without demanding meaningful outcomes. The brain rewards activity because it feels like control, but productivity requires focus, prioritization, and often saying no. Busy work fills time, while real work requires stillness, clarity, and discomfort. Emotionally, this trap is draining. You end each day tired but unsatisfied, overstimulated but unfulfilled. Because nothing essential moves forward, rest never feels earned. You become addicted to motion because stopping would force you to confront stagnation. The noise protects you from silence, where doubt and disappointment live. Over time, busyness becomes identity. You define your worth by how occupied you are. Slowing down feels lazy, even threatening, but the constant motion hides avoidance. You're avoiding the hard decisions, the focused effort, the tasks that actually change your life. Equating busyness with productivity doesn't move you forward. It keeps you running in place, mistaking exhaustion for progress and activity for impact. Using complexity to avoid commitment. Using complexity to avoid commitment is a subtle mental escape that feels intelligent, responsible, and even strategic. You surround decisions with layers of nuance, conditions, and variables, convincing yourself that the situation is too intricate to act on yet. The more complex it becomes, the easier it is to justify not choosing, not starting, and not locking yourself into a path. This trap thrives on the fear of irreversibility. Commitment feels dangerous because it closes doors, creates accountability, and exposes you to consequences. Complexity keeps all options open. By endlessly refining, comparing, and qualifying, you delay the moment where a decision becomes real. The mind feels productive while quietly preserving comfort. Emotionally, this creates a sense of suspended identity. You're never fully in or fully out. You talk in possibilities instead of actions, frameworks instead of steps. Over time, this erodes self-trust. Each avoided commitment reinforces the belief that choosing is risky and hesitation is safer. The world begins to feel overwhelming, not because it is complex, but because you refuse to simplify. The most damaging part is the illusion of depth. You sound thoughtful and sophisticated, yet nothing moves. Life doesn't reward perfect reasoning, it rewards decisive energy. Complexity becomes armor against failure, but also against success. By the time clarity feels acceptable, momentum is gone. Avoiding commitment through complexity keeps you mentally busy and emotionally stalled. You remain unexposed, unchallenged, and untouched by real consequences, while life continues demanding decisions whether you acknowledge them or not, seeking validation instead of results. Seeking validation instead of results is a trap that slowly rewires your motivation away from progress and toward approval. It begins innocently, with a desire to be seen, acknowledged, and affirmed. Praise feels good, recognition feels reassuring, but over time, the need for external validation starts replacing the need to actually build something real. This trap works by shifting the reward system. Instead of measuring success by outcomes, you measure it by reactions. Likes, compliments, attention, and reassurance become the signal that you're doing well. The problem is that validation is immediate and effortless compared to results. You can receive approval without finishing the work, without risking failure, without pushing through discomfort. So the brain learns to chase the signal, not the substance. Emotionally, this creates dependence. Your sense of worth begins to fluctuate with other people's responses. When validation is present, you feel confident. When it's absent, you feel lost, even if you're doing meaningful work. This makes you adjust your actions to be visible and impressive rather than effective. You start choosing what looks good over what actually works. Over time, this erodes internal drive. You hesitate to act without an audience. Quiet progress feels pointless because no one sees it. Deep work feels lonely because it doesn't immediately pay attention back. The most painful part is realizing that validation fades quickly, but results compound. When approval becomes the goal, progress becomes optional. And without progress, no amount of validation can fill the growing sense that you're performing growth instead of living it. Identifying too strongly with being smart. Identifying too strongly with being smart is a trap that slowly turns a strength into a limitation. Intelligence becomes more than a trait. It becomes an identity that must be protected. When being smart is how you see yourself, every mistake feels dangerous, every question feels risky, and every struggle feels like evidence that the identity is cracking. This trap works by shifting focus from growth to preservation. You begin choosing actions that maintain the image rather than expand your ability. You avoid situations where you might look confused, slow, or inexperienced. Learning becomes selective. You gravitate towards spaces where you already shine and quietly step away from places where you might fail publicly. The goal stops being improvement and becomes looking capable. Emotionally, this creates constant pressure. You feel watched even when no one is judging you. Curiosity fades because curiosity requires admitting you don't know. Humility feels threatening because it challenges the image you've built. Over time, intelligence becomes a cage. You think more, but risk less. You explain more, but experience less. The deepest cost is stagnation disguised as confidence. While others grow through trial and error, you stay polished, but unchanged. Life keeps demanding adaptation, but identity keeps pulling you back to what feels safe. Being smart was never meant to define you. When intelligence becomes something to protect instead of something to use, growth slows, courage shrinks, and potential quietly goes unfulfilled. Avoiding beginner status. Avoiding beginner status is a trap fueled by ego, fear, and the desire to protect how others perceive you. Being a beginner feels humiliating. It means not knowing, not performing well, and being visibly inexperienced. For smart, capable people, this feels like a threat to identity, so they avoid starting anything that would place them back at the bottom. This trap convinces you that competence should be immediate. You believe that if something truly suits you, it should feel natural from the start. Struggle becomes a signal to quit instead of a sign of growth. Rather than risk looking incompetent, you stay within the narrow space where you already appear capable, even if it no longer challenges you. Emotionally, this creates stagnation wrapped in pride. You feel safe, but quietly dissatisfied. Curiosity fades because curiosity demands humility. You watch others progress and tell yourself you're just not interested, when in reality, you're avoiding discomfort. Each avoided beginning reinforces the fear, making the idea of starting feel heavier over time. The real cost is invisible at first. Your world shrinks, growth slows, confidence becomes fragile because it's based on image, not ability. Mastery is only possible through awkward beginnings, repeated failure, and visible effort. Avoiding beginner status doesn't preserve your dignity. It locks you into a smaller version of yourself, where potential is admired but never earned. Paralysis by analysis. Paralysis by analysis is the point where thinking stops being a tool and becomes a cage. What begins as responsible consideration slowly turns into endless evaluation, where every option is dissected until none of them feel safe enough to choose. The mind becomes so focused on avoiding the wrong move that it loses the ability to make any move at all. This trap feeds on the illusion that more information will eventually remove uncertainty. You keep analyzing because stopping feels irresponsible, as if acting without total clarity would be a failure of intelligence. But clarity rarely arrives before action. Instead, each layer of analysis reveals new doubts, new risks, and new reasons to hesitate. The decision grows heavier the longer it sits. Emotionally, this creates anxiety masked as diligence. You feel tense, restless, and mentally exhausted, yet outwardly nothing changes. Time passes while you remain frozen, watching opportunities decay. The longer you delay, the higher the emotional stakes become, making action feel even more dangerous. What was once a simple choice now feels like a defining moment. The cruel irony is that analysis promises safety but delivers regret. You begin to associate decisions with stress and self-doubt. Confidence erodes because confidence is built through choosing and adjusting, not waiting. Eventually, inaction becomes the default, and movement feels foreign. Paralysis by analysis doesn't come from lack of intelligence. It comes from fearing the consequences of being wrong more than the cost of staying still, even as life continues moving without you. Treating failure as identity damage. Treating failure as identity damage is a trap that turns ordinary setbacks into personal verdicts. Instead of seeing failure as feedback, the mind interprets it as evidence of who you are. A mistake doesn't mean something went wrong, it means you are wrong. This shift is subtle, but it changes everything about how you move through life. This trap forms when identity becomes fragile. You begin protecting the idea of being capable, smart, or talented at all costs. Any failure threatens that image, so the brain reacts with shame instead of curiosity. Rather than asking what can be learned, you ask what this failure says about you, and the answer always feels heavy, permanent, and unforgiving. Emotionally, this creates fear around effort. If failure equals damage, then trying becomes dangerous. You hesitate to start, avoid challenges, and retreat from situations where outcomes aren't guaranteed. Each avoided risk reinforces the belief that safety comes from staying untested. Over time, you don't just fear failing, you fear discovering something unpleasant about yourself. The damage compounds quietly. Confidence shrinks because confidence is built by surviving failure, not avoiding it. Growth stalls because every meaningful improvement requires falling short first. What hurts most is how personal it feels. You carry the weight of past failures like scars on your identity, even though they were never meant to define you. Failure was supposed to teach you how to stand back up. When it becomes who you are, you stop standing at all. Optimizing trivial details. Optimizing trivial details is a trap that disguises avoidance as precision. It feels productive to tweak, refine, and perfect the small things, especially when those things are measurable and controllable. You tell yourself you're being thorough, disciplined, and committed to excellence, but beneath that surface is a quiet reluctance to confront what actually matters. This trap works because it offers control without consequence. Big actions carry risk. They expose you to failure, judgment, and uncertainty. Small details feel safe. You can endlessly adjust fonts, tools, systems, or minor strategies while postponing the decisions that would truly move things forward. The mind stays busy, protected from the discomfort of meaningful exposure. Emotionally, this creates a false sense of competence mixed with deep frustration. You're always almost ready, always improving something, yet results never arrive. Progress feels close, but never quite reachable. Over time, you begin to confuse polish with progress and neatness with impact. The satisfaction of optimization replaces the satisfaction of achievement. The danger is subtle but powerful. You start believing that success is hidden in perfection, that one more tweak will unlock momentum. Meanwhile, the core problem remains untouched. Optimizing trivial details keeps you in motion without movement, effort without risk, and work without reward. It allows you to feel in control while quietly avoiding the actions that would actually change your life. Believing insight alone creates change. Believing insight alone creates change is a subtle trap that makes you feel enlightened while leaving your life untouched. The moment of realization feels powerful. You finally understand why you behave the way you do, where the pattern comes from, what's been holding you back. That clarity delivers emotional relief, almost like a breakthrough, but relief is not transformation. This trap works because insight feels like progress. Naming the problem calms the mind, reduces guilt, and creates the illusion that something has shifted. You feel smarter, more self-aware, more evolved. But behavior remains the same because insight doesn't carry friction. Change does. Real change demands repetition, discomfort, and the willingness to act differently, even when the old pattern feels easier. Emotionally, this creates a painful loop. You collect realizations but repeat the same outcomes. Each new insight raises hope, and each unchanged result quietly deepens disappointment. Over time, self-awareness becomes a coping mechanism instead of a tool. You explain your behavior so well that you stop challenging it. The danger is that insight becomes an identity. You see yourself as someone who gets it, even as your habits contradict your understanding. Growth stalls because awareness replaces effort. Life doesn't respond to what you understand. It responds to what you do consistently. Believing insight alone creates change, keeps you mentally awake but behaviorally asleep, watching your patterns clearly while continuing to live inside them. Overestimating how much thinking matters. Overestimating how much thinking matters is a trap that quietly inflates the value of the mind while diminishing the role of action. It convinces you that progress is primarily a mental process, that if you think deeply enough, reflect long enough, or understand something thoroughly enough, change will naturally follow. The problem is that life rarely rewards thought without movement. This trap feels comforting because thinking is controlled and private. You can refine ideas endlessly without risking failure or exposure. The mind begins to mistake mental effort for real effort. Hours of reflection feel like work, even though nothing tangible changes. You feel engaged, serious, and intentional while your external life remains untouched. Emotionally, this creates a dangerous imbalance. You start believing your inner world is richer than your outer one. Action begins to feel crude compared to the elegance of thought. But the more you live in your head, the more disconnected you become from momentum, feedback, and reality. Thinking sharpens awareness, but it doesn't build courage, skill, or resilience. Over time, this belief erodes urgency. You delay action because you're still processing. You hesitate because you haven't fully thought it through. Meanwhile, others act with imperfect clarity and surpass you through repetition and adjustment. The gap between insight and outcome widens, creating frustration and quiet self-blame. Thinking matters, but only up to the point where it hands control to action. When thought becomes the destination instead of the guide, it traps you in contemplation while life continues demanding participation, not understanding. Underestimating consistency. Underestimating consistency is a trap that convinces you progress should feel dramatic, fast, and noticeable. Small actions feel insignificant, almost insulting to your ambition. You believe real change comes from intensity, breakthroughs, or moments of inspiration, so repeated effort feels boring and beneath your potential. Quiet discipline doesn't excite the mind, so it's easy to dismiss. This trap works because consistency doesn't reward you immediately. The brain craves visible results, and consistency often shows nothing for a long time. You do the work, show up again, and nothing seems to change. This creates doubt. You start questioning whether your effort matters at all, so you stop, waiting for a more powerful move, unaware that stopping is what resets progress. Emotionally, this creates frustration and impatience. You feel capable of more, but trapped by slow momentum. You underestimate how repetition reshapes identity, confidence, and skill. Consistency isn't just about outcomes, it's about who you become by showing up when motivation fades. But because the change is gradual, you don't feel it happening. Over time, inconsistency becomes the norm. You start strong, stop early, and repeat the cycle, blaming strategy instead of rhythm. Meanwhile, others pass you quietly, not because they are more talented, but because they stayed. The painful truth is that consistency looks weak in the moment, but becomes unstoppable over time. When you underestimate it, you don't just slow down progress, you teach yourself that persistence is optional and that belief is hard to unlearn. Mistaking cynicism for realism. Mistaking cynicism for realism is a trap that makes emotional withdrawal feel like intelligence. Cynicism sounds sharp, guarded, and experienced. It frames hope as naivete and enthusiasm as ignorance. By expecting the worst, you tell yourself you're simply being realistic, protecting yourself from disappointment, even though what you're really doing is preemptively numbing yourself. This trap works by rewarding detachment. If you don't expect much, you can't be hurt as deeply. The mind learns to interpret skepticism as wisdom and emotional distance as maturity. Over time, you stop allowing yourself to fully believe in people, opportunities, or your own potential, not because they aren't worth believing in, but because belief feels vulnerable. Emotionally, this creates quiet isolation. You feel informed but uninspired, safe but disconnected. Cynicism dulls curiosity and erodes motivation, making effort feel pointless before it even begins. You begin dismissing possibilities before testing them, calling it discernment while it quietly limits your world. The future feels smaller because you've already decided how it ends. The most damaging part is how convincing this trap feels. Cynicism offers explanations for inaction that sound thoughtful and mature, but realism includes uncertainty, not just disappointment. It allows room for effort, risk, and growth. When cynicism replaces realism, you don't just avoid being fooled, you avoid being moved, and life slowly loses its color without ever making a sound. Using sarcasm to mask fear. Using sarcasm to mask fear is a defensive trap that turns humor into armor. Sarcasm feels sharp, controlled, and socially acceptable. It allows you to deflect vulnerability while appearing confident, clever, and unaffected. Instead of admitting uncertainty, fear, or desire, you hide behind irony, making it impossible for anyone to see what actually matters to you. This trap works because sarcasm creates distance. It keeps people from getting too close, asking deeper questions, or noticing hesitation. When something feels risky, meaningful, or emotionally charged, sarcasm steps in to reduce the stakes. You joke before you can be judged. You mock before you can be exposed. The laugh protects you from being seen. Emotionally, this slowly isolates you. Real connection requires sincerity, and sincerity requires risk. By constantly deflecting, you train yourself to avoid emotional ownership. Fear never gets confronted because it's never named. Instead, it gets disguised as wit, and over time, you start believing the mask is who you are. The cost shows up in missed intimacy and stalled growth. Opportunities that require belief, commitment, or vulnerability feel uncomfortable, so they're dismissed with humor. You stay emotionally agile, but internally guarded. Sarcasm keeps you safe from embarrassment, but it also keeps you far from courage. What begins as protection eventually becomes a prison where nothing truly matters because nothing is ever taken seriously. Avoiding repetition because it feels dull. Avoiding repetition because it feels dull is a trap that preys on the desire to feel stimulated, intelligent, and exceptional. Repetition looks boring from the outside. It lacks novelty, excitement, and the rush of discovery. The mind quickly labels it as unnecessary, assuming that once something is understood, it should no longer require practice. This belief quietly blocks mastery. This trap convinces you that growth should feel engaging at all times. The moment progress slows and effort becomes routine, motivation fades. You move on to something new, something more interesting, something that makes you feel sharp again. But skill is built in the unremarkable moments, not the exciting ones. Repetition is where depth forms, even though it feels invisible. Emotionally, this creates impatience and fragility. You want progress without endurance. You crave results without the monotony that creates them. Each time repetition feels dull and you abandon it, you reinforce the belief that boredom is a signal to stop. Over time, this conditions you to quit just before consistency begins to compound. The painful irony is that repetition is what turns effort into instinct. Avoiding it keeps everything effortful forever. You remain in the early stages of many things, but never reach fluency in any of them. Confidence stays shallow because it's built through familiarity earned over time. Repetition isn't dull because it lacks value. It feels dull because it removes novelty, forcing you to rely on discipline instead of stimulation. And discipline, not excitement, is what quietly separates those who plateau from those who progress. Assuming others have it figured out. Assuming others have it figured out is a quiet psychological trap that feeds insecurity while pretending to offer perspective. You look around and see confidence, progress, and certainty in others, and your mind fills in the gaps. Their hesitation is invisible. Their doubts are hidden. What you see is the outcome, and you mistake it for clarity. This trap works by distorting comparison. You compare your internal chaos to other people's external composure. Because you have full access to your own fears and uncertainties and almost no access to theirs, the conclusion feels obvious. Everyone else knows what they're doing, and you're the one behind. This belief settles in without evidence and slowly reshapes how you see yourself. Emotionally, it creates unnecessary shame. You hesitate to ask questions because you assume you should already know. You delay action because you believe others are further along and more prepared. Over time, curiosity turns into self-doubt, and learning feels embarrassing instead of natural. You begin waiting to catch up, not realizing there is no finish line you're behind on. The most damaging part is how isolating this belief becomes. You stop sharing struggles, thinking you're the only one still figuring things out. Meanwhile, everyone else is doing the same thing, quietly improvising. Growth doesn't come from having it figured out. It comes from moving forward while you don't. When you assume others are certain, you give away your permission to learn in public, and that permission is where real confidence is built. Waiting to feel ready. Waiting to feel ready is a trap that quietly postpones your life while convincing you it's being responsible. Readiness feels like it should arrive as confidence, clarity, or certainty, some internal signal that says now it's safe to begin. Until then, you wait, observe, and prepare, believing action should follow comfort rather than create it. This trap works because it promises emotional safety. If you don't start yet, you can't fail yet. The mind treats readiness as a prerequisite, not realizing it is usually a result. Confidence, skill, and clarity are built through movement, not contemplation. But the longer you wait, the more unfamiliar action becomes, and unfamiliarity gets mistaken for danger. Emotionally, this creates a loop of self-doubt. Each delay reinforces the idea that you're not capable enough yet. You begin to distrust your ability to adapt, assuming you need more before you can begin. Opportunities feel intimidating, not because they're too big, but because you've trained yourself to only act when fear is gone. The most painful part is the illusion of progress. You feel close, almost there, yet time keeps passing. Others move forward while you're still preparing to prepare. Readiness never announces itself. It emerges mid-action, often after mistakes and discomfort. Waiting to feel ready doesn't make you safer. It keeps you stuck at the starting line, watching the life you want drift further away. Believing motivation precedes action. Believing motivation precedes action is a trap that convinces you to wait for a feeling that rarely arrives on its own. You tell yourself you'll start once you feel inspired, driven, or mentally ready. Until then, you pause, assuming that action without motivation would be forced, inauthentic, or unsustainable. This trap reverses the natural order of progress. Motivation is not the cause of action, it's often the result of it. The brain resists effort until movement begins, then rewards momentum with energy and clarity. By waiting for motivation first, you stay stuck in stillness, interpreting the lack of desire as a signal to delay rather than a barrier to push through. Emotionally, this creates frustration and self-blame. You feel lazy, broken, or undisciplined, wondering why others seem to act so easily. Each day you wait reinforces the belief that something is missing inside you. In reality, what's missing is motion. Action generates feedback, and feedback fuels motivation. Over time, this trap erodes self-trust. You stop believing you can move without feeling good first. Discomfort becomes a stop sign instead of a signal. Life doesn't reward those who feel ready. It rewards those who act despite resistance. Believing motivation must come first keeps you trapped in anticipation, waiting for a spark that only appears after you strike the match yourself. Intellectual pride-blocking feedback. Intellectual pride-blocking feedback is a trap that forms when intelligence becomes part of identity. Once being smart feels central to who you are, feedback stops feeling helpful and starts feeling threatening. Advice is no longer information. It's a challenge to your self-image. Instead of listening, the mind prepares defenses. This trap works by equating correction with inferiority. You begin to believe that if someone points out a flaw, it means you failed to see it yourself, and that feels unacceptable. So you dismiss input, over-explain your reasoning, or quietly decide the other person doesn't understand the full picture. On the surface, you remain composed. Internally, you shut the door. Emotionally, this creates stagnation wrapped in confidence. You feel secure in your perspective while unknowingly repeating the same mistakes. Growth slows because growth requires friction, and feedback is friction. Without it, blind spots expand. The mind becomes a closed system, reinforcing what it already believes. Over time, relationships suffer. Conversations turn into subtle competitions instead of exchanges. People stop offering honest input because it feels wasted or unwelcome. You're left with agreement or silence, neither of which leads to improvement. The world keeps giving signals, but you've trained yourself not to receive them. Intellectual pride protects the ego, but starves development. The irony is that true intelligence grows through correction, not defense. When pride blocks feedback, learning stops, and the very trait you value most quietly turns into the reason you stop evolving. Hiding behind nuance to avoid clarity. Hiding behind nuance to avoid clarity is a trap that makes indecision feel sophisticated. You see complexity everywhere, multiple perspectives, endless exceptions, and valid contradictions. On the surface, this looks like intelligence and depth. Underneath, it often functions as a way to delay commitment and avoid the discomfort of choosing a clear direction. This trap works by turning clarity into something suspicious. Simple answers feel naive, strong positions feel reckless, and decisive statements feel reductive. So you keep qualifying, softening, and expanding the discussion. Every decision becomes a web of "it depends," and every action is postponed in the name of intellectual honesty. The mind stays active, but nothing solid is built. Emotionally, this creates distance from responsibility. Clarity forces you to act and be wrong sometimes. Nuance lets you stay safe, unexposed, and unaccountable. You never fully commit, so you never fully fail, but you also never fully succeed. Over time, this erodes trust in yourself. If you can argue every side, you begin standing on none. The deeper cost is internal confusion. You know a decision is needed, but you keep circling it, explaining instead of choosing. Life starts feeling abstract instead of lived. Clarity isn't ignorance of complexity, it's the courage to act despite it. When nuance becomes a hiding place, intelligence turns into avoidance, and the fear of being wrong quietly outweighs the desire to move forward. Confusing skepticism with intelligence. Confusing skepticism with intelligence is a trap that makes doubt feel like depth. Questioning everything sounds sharp and discerning, as if refusing to believe is proof of mental superiority. You begin to associate disbelief with intelligence, assuming that trusting ideas, people, or possibilities is a sign of being easily fooled rather than open-minded. This trap works by elevating criticism over creation. Skepticism allows you to stand back, analyze, and point out flaws without ever committing. It feels safer to question than to try, safer to doubt than to risk belief. The mind rewards itself for seeing what's wrong, even if it never builds anything right. Over time, skepticism becomes a default stance, not a tool. Emotionally, this creates distance from possibility. You feel informed but disengaged. Curiosity turns into suspicion. Hope feels embarrassing, and enthusiasm feels naive. You begin dismissing ideas before they have a chance to evolve, mistaking caution for clarity. The world starts to look predictable and small, not because it is, but because you've already decided how it works. The danger lies in how persuasive this mindset feels. Skepticism sounds intelligent, but intelligence also requires imagination, experimentation, and belief in incomplete information. When skepticism replaces intelligence, you stop learning through experience and start living as an observer. You avoid being wrong, but you also avoid being transformed, and life becomes something you analyze instead of something you fully engage with. Avoiding deadlines to preserve optionality. Avoiding deadlines to preserve optionality is a trap that feels intelligent, flexible, and strategic, but quietly sabotages execution. By refusing to commit to a specific time, you tell yourself you're keeping possibilities open. You don't want to rush, choose too early, or close doors that might matter later, so you delay commitment in the name of freedom. This trap feeds on the fear of limitation. A deadline makes a choice real. It forces trade-offs, exposes priorities, and removes excuses. Without one, everything stays theoretical and safe. The mind prefers this state because it avoids finality. As long as nothing is locked in, nothing can technically fail. Emotionally, this creates a false sense of control. You feel flexible, but you're actually drifting. Days blur together, progress stalls, and intention never hardens into action. Optionality becomes avoidance disguised as sophistication. You mistake indecision for openness and delay for wisdom. Over time, the cost becomes undeniable. Confidence erodes because confidence is built through follow-through. Opportunities don't wait for perfect timing, and momentum doesn't survive indefinite postponement. Deadlines don't restrict freedom. They create it by forcing movement. Avoiding them doesn't keep your options alive. It quietly ensures that none of them are ever realized. Treating life as a thought experiment. Treating life as a thought experiment is a trap where living is replaced by observing, and experience is filtered through endless reflection. Instead of fully engaging, you stand one step removed, analyzing outcomes, imagining alternatives, and considering hypothetical versions of yourself. Life becomes something to understand rather than something to participate in. This trap feels sophisticated. You pride yourself on perspective, detachment, and mental clarity. By keeping everything conceptual, you avoid embarrassment, risk, and irreversible mistakes. Nothing is fully chosen, so nothing can fully go wrong. But this safety comes at a cost. When everything is hypothetical, nothing feels urgent or real. Emotionally, this creates a quiet emptiness. You have insights without memories, opinions without scars, and clarity without consequence. You think about what you might do instead of discovering who you are through action. Over time, the distance between your inner world and real experience grows, leaving you feeling strangely absent from your own life. The danger deepens because thinking feels like engagement. You feel involved without being exposed. But life doesn't respond to theories, it responds to decisions. The longer you stay in observation mode, the harder it becomes to step into action. Reality feels harsher than imagination, so you retreat further into your head. Treating life as a thought experiment protects you from mistakes, but it also shields you from meaning. Depth is forged through lived consequences, not mental simulations, and without stepping in, life continues unfolding without ever truly touching you. Overvaluing originality over usefulness. Overvaluing originality over usefulness is a trap that makes contribution feel like performance. You become more concerned with being different than being effective, more focused on standing out than actually helping. The idea of doing something that already exists feels uninspiring, even embarrassing, so you keep searching for a unique angle instead of delivering something that works. This trap is driven by ego disguised as creativity. Originality feels like proof of intelligence and identity. Usefulness feels ordinary. The mind convinces you that repeating what already exists adds no value, ignoring the fact that most people don't need novelty, they need clarity, reliability, and execution. So you delay action, waiting for a brilliant twist that justifies starting. Emotionally, this creates pressure and frustration. Every idea feels inadequate unless it's groundbreaking. You dismiss simple solutions because they don't feel impressive enough. Meanwhile, real problems remain unsolved because usefulness doesn't flatter the ego the way originality does. You begin measuring your worth by how clever your ideas are, not by whether they make a difference. Over time, this isolates you from impact. You create for admiration, not adoption. You stay in your head refining concepts while others quietly apply basic principles and move forward. The painful truth is that originality without usefulness rarely matters, but usefulness compounds even when it's unglamorous. When being different becomes the goal, being effective becomes optional, and progress gives way to endless ideation that never leaves the mind. Fear of being ordinary. Fear of being ordinary is a quiet but powerful trap that shapes decisions from the shadows. It's the fear that if your life looks average, your efforts will be meaningless, and your existence will fade without recognition. You don't just want success, you want it to prove something, to matter, to separate you from the crowd, and that pressure subtly distorts how you move through the world. This trap works by making consistency feel beneath you. Ordinary actions look small, repetitive, and unremarkable, so you avoid them while waiting for something exceptional. You chase uniqueness instead of usefulness, intensity instead of discipline. The mind convinces you that if it doesn't feel special, it isn't worth doing. As a result, you delay the very behaviors that actually create extraordinary outcomes. Emotionally, this creates restlessness and dissatisfaction. Nothing feels like enough because nothing feels significant yet. You compare constantly, measuring your life against idealized versions of success, and come up short. The fear of blending in makes starting feel risky, because starting small looks like admitting you're not different after all. The most painful irony is that greatness is built through ordinary effort repeated over time. By avoiding the ordinary, you avoid the path forward. Fear of being ordinary doesn't make you exceptional. It keeps you suspended, chasing identity instead of building substance, while life waits for you to do the unglamorous work that actually makes you stand out. Using learning as procrastination. Using learning as procrastination is a sophisticated trap that makes avoidance feel productive. You read more, watch more, study more, telling yourself you're preparing. Each new piece of information brings a sense of progress, a small emotional reward that convinces you you're moving forward, even as nothing in your life actually changes. This trap works because learning carries no immediate risk. There's no failure in consuming information, no judgment, no exposure. Action, on the other hand, demands commitment and invites mistakes, so the mind chooses safety. It keeps you in the role of the student, where potential stays intact and outcomes are never tested. Emotionally, this creates a quiet imbalance. You begin to feel heavy with knowledge and light on results. The gap between what you know and what you do becomes uncomfortable. You start doubting yourself, not because you lack information, but because you haven't proven anything through action. Learning turns into a delay mechanism rather than a tool. Over time, curiosity loses its innocence. You're no longer learning to apply, you're learning to avoid. Execution feels increasingly intimidating because the stakes feel higher the longer you wait. Knowledge was meant to be a bridge to action, not a place to live. Using learning as procrastination keeps you mentally stimulated but practically stagnant, protected from failure while being quietly robbed of progress. Refusing help to protect ego. Refusing help to protect ego is a trap that disguises itself as independence, strength, and self-reliance. It feels empowering to believe you should handle everything alone, that needing help somehow diminishes your competence. Underneath that belief, however, is often fear of appearing weak, exposed, or less capable than others assume you are. This trap forms when your worth becomes tied to self-sufficiency. Accepting help starts to feel like admitting failure. You tell yourself you'll figure it out eventually, even as frustration builds and progress slows. The ego convinces you that struggling silently is more respectable than learning openly. So you carry the weight alone, even when support is available. Emotionally, this creates isolation. You feel unseen, overburdened, and quietly resentful, yet you reject the very connection that could relieve that pressure. Over time, exhaustion replaces pride. The belief that you must do everything yourself becomes a prison, cutting you off from collaboration, mentorship, and shared momentum. The cost compounds slowly. Problems take longer to solve. Mistakes repeat because outside perspective is missing. Growth stalls because ego demands control. Meanwhile, others move faster not because they're smarter, but because they allow themselves to be supported. Refusing help doesn't prove strength. It proves attachment to an image. Real confidence allows learning in public and asking without shame. When ego blocks assistance, it protects pride in the short term, but quietly steals progress, connection, and ease in the long run. Believing self-awareness equals self-control. Believing self-awareness equals self-control is a trap that makes insight feel like victory. You can clearly see your patterns, name your flaws, and explain exactly why you do what you do. That clarity feels powerful. It feels like progress. But awareness alone doesn't change behavior, and mistaking it for control keeps you stuck in cycles you already understand. This trap works because the brain rewards insight with relief. When you label a habit or uncover a childhood reason behind it, the tension eases. You feel smarter, lighter, almost healed. But nothing has actually shifted. The same impulses return, the same reactions repeat, and the same outcomes appear. Knowing why you do something doesn't stop you from doing it. Emotionally, this creates a subtle form of self-betrayal. You keep telling yourself you're growing because you're aware, yet your actions stay the same. Over time, this gap between insight and behavior breeds frustration and shame. You start questioning why, despite understanding yourself so well, you still can't follow through. Awareness becomes a mirror you keep staring into instead of a doorway you walk through. The deeper cost is false confidence. You believe control will arrive naturally because you get it, but self-control is built through friction, structure, and repeated restraint, not reflection alone. When awareness replaces action, growth turns into commentary. You don't need more insight, you need practice, and until awareness is paired with discipline, it remains a description, not a solution. Avoiding measurable goals. Avoiding measurable goals is a trap that keeps ambition comfortably vague. It feels flexible, open-ended, and less stressful to say you want to improve, grow, or explore, rather than commit to something concrete. Numbers, deadlines, and clear targets feel restrictive, even threatening, because they remove ambiguity and replace it with accountability. This trap works by protecting self-image. When goals aren't measurable, failure is harder to define. You can always claim progress without proving it. The mind prefers this softness because measurable goals force confrontation with reality. They expose the gap between intention and outcome, and that exposure feels uncomfortable. So you stay abstract, convincing yourself clarity will come later. Emotionally, this creates quiet stagnation. You feel busy but directionless. Effort lacks weight because there's no clear signal of success or failure. Over time, motivation erodes, not because you lack desire, but because the brain struggles to commit to something it can't track. Progress becomes a feeling rather than a fact, and feelings are easy to rationalize. The deeper cost is erosion of self-trust. You don't know if you're moving forward because you've removed the evidence. Growth becomes something you assume instead of something you see. Measurable goals don't limit freedom. They reveal reality. Avoiding them doesn't reduce pressure. It quietly removes the structure that turns effort into momentum and intention into real change. Romanticizing struggle instead of solving problems. Romanticizing struggle instead of solving problems is a trap that turns pain into identity. You begin to see hardship as proof of depth, meaning, or moral strength. Struggle becomes something to endure and even admire, rather than a signal that something needs to change. Suffering starts to feel noble, purposeful, almost necessary. This trap works because struggle gives you a story. It allows you to feel significant without requiring resolution. As long as you're fighting, striving, or enduring, you don't have to confront uncomfortable questions about strategy, boundaries, or responsibility. Solving the problem might mean changing direction, letting go, or admitting something isn't working. Enduring it feels safer. Emotionally, this creates a quiet stagnation masked as resilience. You pride yourself on how much you can carry, how long you can push, how deeply you can feel. But underneath, exhaustion builds. Progress slows because pain is being preserved instead of reduced. You confuse intensity with importance and effort with effectiveness. Over time, struggle becomes familiar. Peace starts to feel suspicious. Solutions feel anticlimactic because they don't match the drama you've built around suffering. Life doesn't reward how much you endure. It rewards what you fix. Romanticizing struggle keeps you emotionally invested in pain, convincing you it's meaningful while the actual problem remains untouched, quietly waiting to be solved. Overidentifying with past success. Overidentifying with past success is a trap that forms when achievements stop being milestones and start becoming identity. What once proved your capability slowly turns into something you must protect. The success that gave you confidence now defines you, and anything that threatens it feels dangerous. Growth becomes less about progress and more about preservation. This trap works by anchoring your self-worth to who you used to be. You measure current choices against past wins, asking whether they will reinforce or undermine that image. Instead of experimenting, you repeat what once worked. Instead of learning, you defend. The mind clings to familiarity because starting again risks looking smaller than your former self. Emotionally, this creates fear, disguised as confidence. You feel pressure to live up to a version of yourself frozen in time. Every new challenge carries the risk of exposing decline. So you avoid arenas where you might struggle, preferring environments where your past success still earns respect. Over time, relevance replaces curiosity, and safety replaces ambition. The cost is subtle but severe. Skills stagnate, adaptability fades. You begin to feel behind while pretending to be ahead. The world moves forward, but you're guarding a trophy instead of building something new. What once empowered you now limits you. Past success should be proof of capability, not a cage. When identity is tied to what you've already done, future growth feels like a threat instead of an opportunity, and potential quietly gets traded for nostalgia. Believing complexity equals depth. Believing complexity equals depth is a trap that makes confusion feel meaningful. When something is difficult to explain, layered, or abstract, it appears intelligent and profound. Simplicity, by contrast, feels shallow or obvious. So the mind gravitates toward complicated explanations, intricate systems, and dense language, assuming that depth must look hard to understand. This trap works by flattering the intellect. Complexity signals intelligence, both to yourself and to others. It allows you to feel advanced without being clear. But depth isn't about how tangled an idea is, it's about how true and usable it becomes. When complexity replaces clarity, understanding stays theoretical and detached from real life. Emotionally, this creates distance. You talk about life instead of engaging with it. You analyze instead of decide. Simple truths that demand action are dismissed because they feel too plain to matter. Over time, you hide behind elaborate thinking to avoid confronting obvious changes you already know you need to make. The cost shows up in stagnation. Nothing moves because nothing is simple enough to act on. You mistake mental difficulty for insight, not realizing that the deepest truths are often the easiest to recognize and the hardest to live by. Complexity keeps you busy and impressed with yourself, while clarity quietly waits. When depth is confused with complication, wisdom gets buried under explanations, and the courage to act gets lost in the noise. Avoiding boring but effective solutions. Avoiding boring but effective solutions is a trap that makes progress feel beneath you. Simple, proven methods often lack excitement, novelty, or intellectual stimulation, so the mind dismisses them as too basic to matter. You look for something more elegant, more clever, more interesting, assuming real breakthroughs should feel inspiring rather than repetitive. This trap works by confusing stimulation with impact. Boring solutions require patience, consistency, and humility. They don't deliver quick emotional rewards. Flashy ideas do. So you chase strategies that feel exciting while quietly avoiding the ones that actually work. The brain prefers novelty because novelty feels like progress, even when it produces nothing. Emotionally, this creates frustration and impatience. You want results without monotony, change without repetition. When simple solutions don't immediately transform your life, you abandon them, telling yourself they weren't sophisticated enough. Over time, you start believing your situation is uniquely complex, that ordinary fixes can't apply to you. The cost is momentum. Effective solutions work precisely because they're boring. They rely on small actions done consistently, not dramatic insights. By avoiding them, you trade reliability for stimulation. Growth slows, confidence weakens, and effort feels scattered. Boring solutions aren't beneath you, they're beneath your ego, and avoiding them keeps you searching for answers while the obvious ones wait quietly, unused, ready to change everything if you'd let them. Confusing explanation with mastery. Confusing explanation with mastery is a trap that convinces you that being able to articulate something means you've truly embodied it. You can describe the process, break it down step by step, and explain it clearly to others so it feels complete. The mind registers fluency in language as fluency in action, even when the two are miles apart. This trap forms because explanation feels powerful. When you can put words to something, you feel in control of it. You sound competent, informed, and capable. But mastery lives in execution under pressure, not in clean narratives. Knowing how something works doesn't mean you can consistently do it when it matters. Emotionally, this creates a false sense of progress. You feel advanced without being tested. You talk confidently while avoiding the vulnerability of performance. Over time, this gap becomes uncomfortable. You know what should be done, yet you struggle to do it. Each failure feels heavier because you should be better by now. The danger deepens as explanation replaces practice. You teach before you train. You advise before you apply. The identity of being knowledgeable becomes safer than the risk of being inexperienced again. Growth slows because mastery requires repetition, feedback, and exposure, not just understanding. Explanation can clarify, but it cannot substitute experience. When language becomes a stand-in for skill, the mind stays polished while ability remains fragile, and reality eventually exposes the difference in moments where words are no longer enough. Waiting for inspiration instead of discipline. Waiting for inspiration instead of discipline is a trap that convinces you creativity, progress, and excellence should feel exciting before they begin. You wait for the mood, the spark, the emotional pull that makes action feel natural. Until then, you pause, believing forced effort would be hollow or unsustainable. This trap flatters the idea that your best work only emerges when you feel aligned, but inspiration is unpredictable and rare, while discipline is reliable and available every day. By depending on inspiration, you hand control of your progress to your emotions. When energy dips, momentum disappears. When excitement fades, consistency collapses. Emotionally, this creates cycles of hope and disappointment. You feel powerful on inspired days and useless on ordinary ones. The gap between who you could be and what you actually do widens because most days don't come with a spark. You begin to mistrust yourself, assuming the lack of motivation means something is wrong. Discipline, unlike inspiration, doesn't negotiate. It moves you forward even when you feel flat, tired, or uncertain. Waiting for inspiration keeps you emotionally reactive, starting and stopping based on feeling. Progress is built in repetition, not excitement. By delaying action until it feels right, you quietly surrender control, allowing potential to sit idle while you wait for a feeling that was never meant to lead. Overestimating future willpower. Overestimating future willpower is a trap that lets you feel disciplined today by promising effort tomorrow. You assume your future self will be more motivated, more focused, more capable of doing what you're avoiding now. This belief feels comforting because it removes immediate pressure while preserving the illusion of responsibility. The mind loves this trap because it postpones discomfort. Saying, "I'll do it later," feels reasonable, even strategic. But future willpower is imagined, not guaranteed. The same mind, the same habits, and the same resistance usually show up again. By relying on a stronger version of yourself that never arrives, you quietly train yourself to delay. Emotionally, this creates a subtle erosion of trust. Each postponed action sends a message that your intentions don't matter. You begin to doubt your own promises, not consciously, but through repeated disappointment. Guilt builds because you know what needs to be done, yet keep pushing it forward in time. Over time, the gap between intention and action widens. Tasks feel heavier the longer they're avoided. Confidence weakens because self-discipline is built by honoring small commitments, not by imagining future strength. Willpower isn't something you magically gain later. It's something you practice now. Overestimating future willpower doesn't make life easier. It quietly ensures the hard things never get done. Treating choices as permanent. Treating choices as permanent is a trap that inflates every decision until it feels irreversible and heavy with consequence. Instead of seeing choices as steps, you see them as verdicts on your future. Each option feels like a door that closes all others forever, so choosing becomes terrifying. The mind demands certainty before acting, even though certainty rarely exists. This trap feeds on the fear of regret. You imagine the worst possible outcome and convince yourself it will define you permanently. Because of this, small decisions begin to feel monumental. You delay, reconsider, and replay scenarios endlessly, hoping to find the right choice that guarantees safety. But life doesn't work that way. Most choices are adjustable, but fear makes them feel final. Emotionally, this creates pressure and exhaustion. You carry the weight of imagined futures instead of responding to the present. Each decision drains energy, making progress feel costly. Over time, you associate movement with anxiety and stillness with relief, even as stillness slowly limits your life. The irony is that refusing to choose is itself a choice, and it carries its own permanent consequences. Opportunities expire, skills fade, paths narrow, not because you chose wrong, but because you chose nothing. Flexibility disappears the longer you wait. Choices are rarely permanent, but avoidance is. Treating decisions as irreversible traps you in hesitation, while those who act adjust along the way. Life rewards direction, not perfection, and permanence is usually created by inaction, not by choosing. Thinking faster instead of acting sooner. Thinking faster instead of acting sooner is a trap that convinces you speed of thought can replace speed of movement. You pride yourself on how quickly you can analyze, predict, and mentally rehearse outcomes. Ideas fire rapidly, connections form instantly, and decisions seem almost made in your head, yet nothing actually happens. This trap works by rewarding mental agility without demanding commitment. Fast thinking feels like progress because it creates the illusion of control. You believe that if you think through something thoroughly and quickly enough, action will naturally follow. Instead, thought becomes the endpoint. The brain stays active while the body stays still. Emotionally, this creates a restless tension. Your mind races ahead, imagining futures that never arrive. You feel capable and stuck at the same time. Each delay is justified by one more thought, one more consideration, one more internal simulation. Over time, acting begins to feel clumsy compared to the elegance of thinking, and you postpone action to preserve that sense of intellectual mastery. The deeper damage is erosion of trust in yourself. You start associating action with imperfection and thinking with competence. But real progress is slow, awkward, and imperfect by nature. Thinking faster doesn't reduce risk, it just delays reality. Life doesn't reward the quickest mind, it rewards the first step taken. When thinking replaces movement, intelligence becomes inertia, and potential remains trapped in thought. Letting intelligence justify inaction. Letting intelligence justify inaction is a trap where sharp thinking becomes a shield against responsibility. You can see every angle, every flaw, every possible downside, and that awareness feels like wisdom. But instead of guiding action, intelligence is used to explain why action shouldn't happen yet. The smarter the explanation, the easier it becomes to stay still. This trap works by turning insight into an excuse. You don't avoid acting because you're afraid. You avoid it because you've thought it through. You can articulate risks with precision, predict obstacles before they appear, and explain why timing, structure, or circumstances aren't ideal. Each justification sounds reasonable, even mature, but together they form a wall between intention and movement. Emotionally, this creates a strange emptiness. You feel mentally active, but internally stagnant. There's a growing frustration that comes from knowing you understand more than you apply. Intelligence becomes heavy, not empowering, because it constantly shows you what could go wrong without ever showing you what could go right through effort. The deeper damage is to self-trust. When you repeatedly talk yourself out of action, you teach yourself that thinking is safer than doing. Over time, courage weakens, momentum disappears, and life starts to feel theoretical. Intelligence was meant to guide action, not replace it. When it becomes a justification for inaction, brilliance turns into paralysis, and potential stays locked behind perfect reasoning that never moves. Avoiding simplicity because it feels reductive. Avoiding simplicity because it feels reductive is a trap that makes clarity feel like betrayal of intelligence. Simple solutions appear incomplete, almost insulting, as if they ignore important nuance. You worry that reducing something down means missing something vital, so you resist simplifying, even when simplicity would move you forward. This trap works by equating simplicity with ignorance. If an answer is easy to state, it feels too small to be true. So you keep expanding the problem, adding layers, exceptions, and conditions. The issue grows more complex, not because it needs to, but because complexity feels safer than committing to a clear, actionable path. Emotionally, this creates mental exhaustion. You feel overwhelmed by problems that could be manageable. Decisions feel heavier than they are because you refuse to reduce them. Over time, this avoidance becomes a form of self-sabotage. You delay progress under the guise of being thorough, while simplicity waits, unused, because it doesn't feel intellectually satisfying. The deeper cost is stagnation. Most meaningful change is built on simple, repeatable actions, not elaborate frameworks. By avoiding simplicity, you avoid consistency, and without consistency, nothing compounds. Simplicity isn't the absence of depth, it's the result of understanding. When you reject it, you don't preserve truth. You bury it under complexity and call it caution, while life quietly passes by unchanged. Mistaking critical thinking for progress. Mistaking critical thinking for progress is a trap that makes mental sharpness feel like movement. You analyze, question, deconstruct, and critique, believing that spotting flaws is the same as advancing. Critical thinking feels active and intelligent, but without action, it becomes a closed loop where insight circulates and nothing changes. This trap works because criticism creates distance. By standing outside a problem and dissecting it, you avoid the vulnerability of participation. It's safer to evaluate than to engage, safer to point out what's wrong than to risk being wrong yourself. The mind rewards itself for accuracy, even when accuracy produces no outcome. Emotionally, this leads to quiet stagnation. You feel informed, even superior, yet oddly unfulfilled. The world becomes something you observe and judge rather than shape. Over time, critique replaces contribution. You grow fluent in identifying problems, but inexperienced in solving them. The gap between awareness and agency widens. The most damaging aspect is how convincing this trap feels. Critical thinking sounds like progress because it's intellectually demanding, but progress requires friction with reality. It requires trying, adjusting, failing, and refining. When thinking replaces doing, growth becomes theoretical. You avoid mistakes, but you also avoid momentum. And slowly, life becomes a series of well-reasoned observations instead of lived outcomes that actually move you forward. Protecting self-image over truth. Protecting self-image over truth is a trap that quietly prioritizes comfort over growth. You become more invested in how you see yourself than in what's actually real. Instead of asking whether something is true, you ask whether it threatens your identity. When it does, the mind reshapes facts, excuses behavior, and deflects responsibility to preserve the image you've built. This trap works because identity feels fragile. Admitting you're wrong, limited, or responsible for a failure feels like self-destruction rather than correction, so the mind defends. It explains, justifies, reframes. Truth becomes negotiable, not because it's unclear, but because it's inconvenient. Growth stalls the moment honesty feels dangerous. Emotionally, this creates inner tension. You sense when something doesn't align, but confronting it would cost you the story you tell about yourself. Over time, this avoidance hardens into rigidity. Feedback feels like attack. Reflection feels threatening. You become skilled at defending who you are instead of improving who you're becoming. The cost is slow and deep. Self-respect erodes because it's built on honesty, not image. Relationships suffer because authenticity is replaced with performance. Life keeps presenting the same lessons, just louder. Protecting self-image doesn't protect you. It traps you in a version of yourself that can't evolve, forcing truth to wait while comfort takes the lead. Believing. Understanding replaces practice. Believing understanding replaces practice is a trap that makes insight feel like completion. Once you grasp the concept, the mind relaxes, as if the work is done. You know what to do, why it matters, and how it should work, so practicing it feels redundant. But knowing the path and walking it are entirely different experiences. This trap forms because understanding is clean and satisfying. It creates a sense of closure without requiring effort. Practice, on the other hand, is repetitive, frustrating, and humbling. It exposes gaps between intention and ability, so the mind clings to comprehension and avoids repetition, convincing itself that action will naturally follow insight. Emotionally, this creates quiet self-betrayal. You feel capable in theory, but inconsistent in reality. Each time you fail to apply what you understand, confidence erodes. You start questioning your discipline, not realizing the issue isn't willpower, it's misplaced belief. Insight without repetition has no muscle. Over time, this gap widens. You accumulate awareness while habits remain unchanged. You speak fluently about growth while staying stuck in the same patterns. The frustration deepens because you can't claim ignorance anymore. You know better, yet nothing feels different. Understanding opens the door, but practice is what carries you through it. When comprehension is mistaken for completion, growth stalls at the starting line, and potential remains locked behind effort. You keep postponing, avoiding constraints. Avoiding constraints is a trap that disguises itself as freedom. You want unlimited options, maximum flexibility, and the ability to change direction at any moment. Constraints feel restrictive, artificial, even suffocating, so you resist structure, boundaries, and rules, believing they limit creativity and potential rather than shape it. This trap works because constraint forces choice. The moment limits are set, something else must be excluded, and exclusion feels like loss. Keeping everything open feels empowering, but it quietly removes urgency and focus. When nothing is defined, nothing demands action. The mind stays comfortable in possibility while avoiding the discomfort of commitment. Emotionally, this creates diffusion. Energy spreads thin across too many directions, and progress stalls without a clear channel. You feel busy but unfocused, capable but scattered. Over time, optionality becomes paralysis. You hesitate to lock anything in because doing so would expose you to failure and close off alternatives you might one day want. The deeper cost is wasted potential. Constraints don't kill creativity, they give it a shape. Without limits, effort dissolves into exploration without results. Discipline, deadlines, and boundaries are what turn ideas into reality. When you avoid constraints, you avoid the pressure that forces growth. Freedom without structure feels open, but it rarely moves anywhere. Delaying decisions to gather more data. Delaying decisions to gather more data is a trap that disguises fear as diligence. It feels responsible to wait, to research, to make sure you're fully informed before committing. The language sounds rational and careful, but beneath it is a deep discomfort with uncertainty and ownership. More data becomes a reason to postpone the moment where you must choose and live with the consequences. This trap works because information feels safer than commitment. As long as you're still collecting, you don't have to decide. You can tell yourself you're being thorough, even though the core variables are already clear. The mind exaggerates the value of additional input, convincing you that one more article, opinion, or metric will suddenly remove doubt. It never does. Emotionally, this creates constant mental tension. You feel stuck between options, carrying unfinished decisions like background noise in your head. Each delay subtly increases pressure, because now the decision feels heavier than before. You start doubting your judgment, assuming certainty must come from outside rather than being created through action. Over time, this habit erodes confidence. Decisiveness weakens when it's not exercised. Life begins to feel reactive because you're always waiting for more clarity instead of creating it. The irony is that most clarity comes after decisions, not before them. Data can inform, but it cannot choose for you. When gathering information becomes avoidance, you don't become smarter. You become stalled, trapped in preparation, while momentum quietly slips away. Confusing intelligence with emotional maturity. Confusing intelligence with emotional maturity is a trap that allows sharp thinking to hide emotional avoidance. You can analyze situations clearly, articulate feelings accurately, and explain behavior with precision, which creates the illusion of emotional growth. But understanding emotions is not the same as regulating them, and explaining pain is not the same as healing it. This trap works because intelligence is impressive and socially rewarded. You sound self-aware, reasonable, and composed. Yet beneath that clarity, emotional reactions still run unchecked. You may rationalize anger instead of processing it, intellectualize hurt instead of feeling it, or justify withdrawal instead of communicating honestly. The mind stays in control while emotions remain unresolved. Emotionally, this creates a subtle disconnect. You know what you feel, but don't necessarily know how to sit with it. You can name patterns without changing them. Over time, this leads to repeated emotional conflicts that feel confusing because you believe you've already done the work. Frustration builds as life keeps challenging the same weak spots. True emotional maturity shows up in restraint, vulnerability, and accountability, not in clever explanations. It's revealed in how you respond under pressure, how you handle discomfort, and how you treat others when you don't feel understood. Confusing intelligence with emotional maturity keeps growth theoretical, allowing emotions to stay unmanaged while the mind convinces itself it's evolved. Using humor to deflect accountability. Using humor to deflect accountability is a trap that turns charm into armor. A joke lands, tension dissolves, and suddenly the focus shifts away from responsibility. Laughter becomes a way to soften mistakes, dodge confrontation, and avoid sitting with discomfort. It feels harmless, even likable, but underneath it often serves as a shield against ownership. This trap works because humor creates emotional distance. By making light of a failure, you control the narrative before anyone else can. You signal awareness without actually committing to change. The moment things get serious, you defuse it with wit, keeping conversation shallow and consequences blurred. What could have been a moment of growth becomes entertainment. Emotionally, this creates stagnation masked as confidence. You appear self-aware while staying untouched. Over time, people stop pressing you, not because the issue is resolved, but because they sense resistance. Feedback turns into laughter, and laughter replaces resolution. The pattern repeats because nothing is ever fully addressed. The cost shows up quietly. Trust weakens. Others stop taking your commitments seriously. You begin to believe that acknowledging flaws humorously is the same as correcting them. It isn't. Awareness without action becomes performance. Humor has power when used to connect, but when it's used to escape responsibility, it blocks depth. Growth requires staying present in discomfort long enough to change. When every hard moment is turned into a joke, accountability never lands, and the behavior you laugh about quietly continues running your life. Preferring theory to responsibility. Preferring theory to responsibility is a trap that makes understanding feel safer than ownership. Theory allows you to observe life from a distance, to explain outcomes without being accountable for them. You can analyze systems, critique decisions, and discuss possibilities without having to commit yourself to a specific result. This trap works because theory carries no consequences. If an idea fails in theory, nothing is lost. Responsibility, however, demands follow-through. It ties outcomes to your actions and exposes you to judgment. So, the mind retreats into abstraction, where mistakes are intellectual and never personal. Emotionally, this creates a false sense of competence. You sound informed, insightful, even wise, yet you avoid the weight of execution. Over time, this gap becomes uncomfortable. You know what should be done. You can explain it clearly, but you don't step into the role that would make it real. This creates quiet guilt, masked by more thinking and more discussion. The deeper damage is erosion of agency. You stop seeing yourself as someone who shapes outcomes and start seeing yourself as someone who comments on them. Life feels theoretical instead of lived. Responsibility is where identity is forged, where confidence is earned, and where growth actually happens. When theory becomes a refuge, intelligence becomes an excuse, and the courage to take ownership slowly disappears behind explanations. Avoiding routines because they feel limiting. Avoiding routines because they feel limiting is a trap that confuses freedom with chaos. Structure feels restrictive at first glance, as if committing to repeated behaviors will shrink your options and dull your creativity. You tell yourself you need flexibility, spontaneity, and openness, believing routines are for people who lack imagination or depth. This trap works by appealing to identity. Routines feel ordinary, mechanical, even boring, and the mind resists anything that threatens its sense of uniqueness. But without routine, every action requires fresh energy and fresh decisions. The brain becomes exhausted, and important behaviors are left to mood and motivation, which are unreliable. Emotionally, this creates inconsistency and quiet frustration. Some days you feel capable and inspired, other days scattered and unproductive. Progress becomes unpredictable because nothing is anchored. You blame circumstances or motivation, not realizing the real issue is the absence of systems that support you when motivation disappears. The deeper cost is lost momentum. Routines don't limit freedom, they preserve it by reducing friction. They create a stable foundation that allows creativity to flourish on top of consistency. By avoiding routines, you force yourself to start from zero every day. What feels like freedom slowly becomes instability, and the life you want stays out of reach, not because it's impossible, but because you refuse the structure that could have carried you there. Treating life like a debate to win. Treating life like a debate to win is a trap that turns understanding into competition. You approach conversations, conflicts, and even relationships with the goal of being right rather than being real. Every interaction becomes an opportunity to defend your position, expose flaws in others' arguments, and reinforce your intellectual standing. This trap works because winning feels validating. Being right provides a sense of control and superiority, especially when uncertainty feels threatening. But life isn't a logic exercise. People aren't problems to solve or opponents to outmaneuver. When everything becomes a debate, listening turns into waiting for your turn to speak, and connection turns into strategy. Emotionally, this creates distance. Others feel unheard, corrected, or subtly diminished. You may win arguments, but lose trust. Over time, relationships harden because openness disappears. Vulnerability feels dangerous when every statement might be dissected. You become respected for your sharpness, but avoided for your rigidity. Internally, this trap is exhausting. Constantly defending positions leaves little room for curiosity or growth. Admitting uncertainty feels like defeat, so learning slows. Life keeps offering lessons that require humility, not cleverness. Treating life like a debate doesn't make you stronger. It traps you in a posture of defense, where being right matters more than being connected, and understanding is sacrificed for the comfort of winning. Rationalizing bad habits with intelligence. Rationalizing bad habits with intelligence is a trap where sharp thinking becomes a defense mechanism. Instead of confronting behaviors that undermine you, the mind builds explanations that make them seem reasonable, temporary, or even strategic. You don't deny the habit is harmful, you simply explain why it makes sense right now. That explanation becomes permission. This trap is powerful because it sounds logical. You frame indulgence as balance, avoidance as self-care, and inconsistency as flexibility. The smarter you are, the more convincing the story becomes. Intelligence supplies context, nuance, and justification, allowing the habit to survive without guilt. The problem isn't ignorance, it's accommodation. Emotionally, this creates internal tension. Part of you knows the habit is costing you energy, confidence, or health. Another part keeps talking you out of changing. Each rationalization erodes self-trust. You start noticing the gap between what you believe and what you do, and that gap quietly damages respect for yourself. Over time, the habit strengthens because it's never challenged directly. Instead of resistance, it meets understanding. Instead of boundaries, it gets explanations. Progress slows not because change is impossible, but because the mind keeps negotiating with what should be non-negotiable. Intelligence is meant to solve problems, not excuse them. When it's used to protect harmful patterns, it becomes an accomplice to stagnation. The habit stays, the explanations evolve, and the cost keeps compounding while you continue sounding reasonable instead of becoming better. Believing smart people shouldn't need structure. Believing smart people shouldn't need structure is a trap rooted in pride and misunderstanding. Structure feels like a crutch, something meant for people who lack discipline, creativity, or intelligence. You believe that if you're truly capable, you should be able to rely on motivation, insight, and willpower alone. Needing systems feels like an admission of weakness. This trap works by tying identity to effortlessness. You want your success to look natural, flexible, and spontaneous. Schedules, routines, and rules feel rigid and beneath you. But intelligence doesn't protect you from distraction, fatigue, or inconsistency. Without structure, even the smartest minds drift. Emotionally, this creates self-blame. When things don't move forward, you assume something is wrong with you, not your setup. You try harder mentally instead of changing your environment. Over time, motivation becomes unreliable and progress feels random. You feel capable, but strangely unable to sustain momentum. The deeper cost is chronic inconsistency. Structure isn't a sign of limitation, it's a tool for focus. It frees mental energy instead of consuming it. The people who move the furthest aren't the ones who feel inspired every day. They're the ones who designed systems that work on their worst days. When you reject structure, you don't prove intelligence. You quietly handicap it. Overconfidence in mental models. Overconfidence in mental models is a trap that turns useful frameworks into rigid filters. Mental models are meant to simplify reality, to help you navigate complexity without getting lost. But when confidence in them hardens into certainty, they stop being tools and start becoming blindfolds. You don't see the world as it is anymore, only as your models allow it to be. This trap works because mental models feel empowering. They give you language, structure, and the feeling of being ahead of chaos. Once you believe you understand how things work, uncertainty feels unnecessary. New information gets interpreted through old frameworks, and anything that doesn't fit is dismissed as noise, exception, or error. The model stays intact, even when reality disagrees. Emotionally, this creates subtle arrogance mixed with fragility. You feel confident until life breaks the pattern, and when it does, the shock is destabilizing. Instead of adapting, you double down, forcing reality to match your thinking. Mistakes become harder to admit because they threaten the model you rely on to feel competent and in control. The deeper damage is rigidity. Growth requires updating beliefs, but overconfidence resists revision. You stop learning from experience because you think you already understand it. Mental models were meant to evolve, not dominate. When they become untouchable, they quietly separate you from reality. Intelligence becomes brittle instead of flexible, and instead of using models to navigate life, you end up defending them while life moves in directions you no longer know how to follow. Ignoring physical basics like sleep and health. Ignoring physical basics like sleep and health is a trap that convinces you the mind can outrun the body. You treat rest, nutrition, and movement as optional, secondary, or inefficient, believing discipline means pushing through exhaustion. The body becomes something to manage later, while mental effort is prioritized as if it exists independently. This trap works because neglect doesn't hurt immediately. You can function while tired. You can perform while depleted, so you assume the cost is minimal. But the body keeps score quietly. Sleep loss dulls judgment, weakens emotional regulation, and amplifies stress. Poor health doesn't just affect energy, it reshapes how you think, react, and decide. Emotionally, this creates irritability, fog, and a constant low-level tension you can't quite explain. Small problems feel overwhelming, motivation drops, focus fractures. You may blame mindset, discipline, or circumstances, unaware that your foundation is unstable. The mind feels heavy because the body is neglected. Over time, this trap erodes self-trust. You start believing you're less capable than you actually are. Burnout feels personal rather than physiological. Rest begins to feel like weakness instead of maintenance. But clarity, resilience, and discipline are built on physical basics. Ignoring them doesn't make you tougher. It quietly sabotages your potential, forcing the mind to operate from a body that never fully recovers. Treating problems as puzzles, not realities. Treating problems as puzzles, not realities, is a trap that turns lived challenges into abstract exercises. You approach issues with curiosity instead of urgency, analysis instead of engagement. The problem becomes something to figure out intellectually rather than something to confront emotionally or practically. This creates distance, and distance feels safe. This trap forms when thinking becomes more comfortable than acting. Puzzles are neat. They have logic, elegance, and satisfying solutions. Real problems are messy, emotional, and inconvenient. By reframing life challenges as intellectual exercises, you avoid the discomfort of stakes, responsibility, and vulnerability. You stay clever while remaining untouched. Emotionally, this creates detachment. You can discuss your struggles calmly while remaining unchanged by them. You sound thoughtful, even insightful, yet the issue persists because it hasn't been addressed where it actually lives. Reality doesn't respond to cleverness alone. It responds to sustained, sometimes uncomfortable action. Over time, this pattern numbs urgency. You become fascinated by the structure of the problem instead of motivated to resolve it. Meanwhile, consequences accumulate. Relationships strain, habits calcify, opportunities fade. You're still thinking while life is still happening. The danger is subtle because intelligence is rewarded, but insight without intervention doesn't reduce damage. When problems are treated like puzzles, they stay theoretical. When they're treated as realities, they demand courage, consistency, and presence. Without that shift, the mind stays busy while the problem quietly grows heavier and more costly, waiting to optimize instead of starting. Waiting to optimize instead of starting is a trap that makes delay feel strategic. You convince yourself that beginning without the perfect setup would be inefficient, that refining the plan first will save time later. Optimization feels responsible, intelligent, and forward-thinking. Starting feels premature, even reckless. This trap works because optimization lives in the future, where consequences don't exist yet. You tweak methods, compare tools, and search for the best approach, believing that once everything is refined, execution will be smooth. But optimization without experience is guesswork. You can't improve what you haven't touched, and waiting only increases the distance between intention and action. Emotionally, this creates a false sense of progress. You feel productive while avoiding the discomfort of imperfect action. Over time, starting becomes heavier. The more you plan, the more pressure builds around getting it right. Fear hides behind efficiency, and hesitation hides behind preparation. The deeper cost is momentum loss. Progress doesn't come from optimized beginnings. It comes from rough starts followed by adjustment. Most clarity emerges after movement, not before it. When you wait to optimize, you trade real feedback for imagined control. Life doesn't reward perfect plans, it rewards beginnings. And when starting is delayed long enough, even the best optimization becomes irrelevant. Avoiding repetition because it feels unintelligent. Avoiding repetition because it feels unintelligent is a trap that confuses novelty with growth. Repetition looks dull, mechanical, and beneath someone who prides themselves on thinking quickly and understanding things fast. Once you get it, doing it again feels pointless, even insulting to your intelligence. So you move on, searching for something new instead of reinforcing what actually works. This trap works by flattering the ego. It suggests that repetition is for people who don't understand deeply, while smart people should grasp things once and advance. But mastery doesn't come from understanding, it comes from embedding behavior through repeated action. The mind may be quick, but skills, habits, and results are built slowly. Emotionally, this creates inconsistency and frustration. You start many things, but finish few. Progress feels scattered because nothing is practiced long enough to compound. When results don't appear, you assume the method was flawed or uninspiring, not that it simply needed time and repetition. Confidence erodes because reliability is never developed. The deeper cost is missed mastery. The most effective behaviors in life are boring precisely because they work through repetition. By avoiding them, you trade depth for stimulation. Intelligence becomes restless, always searching, never settling. Repetition was never a sign of weakness. It's the mechanism through which understanding becomes capability and capability becomes identity. Avoiding it keeps you clever, but not effective. Letting identity dictate choices. Letting identity dictate choices is a trap that turns self-definition into a cage. You stop asking what makes sense now and start asking what fits the story you tell about yourself. I'm not that kind of person. I don't do things like that, or people like me don't fail, become invisible rules shaping every decision. This trap works because identity feels stable. It gives you coherence and certainty in a complex world. But when identity hardens, it resists growth. New opportunities feel threatening if they contradict who you believe you are. Change feels like betrayal rather than evolution. Instead of adapting to reality, you force reality to fit your self-image. Emotionally, this creates quiet conflict. You feel pulled toward growth but held back by loyalty to an outdated version of yourself. Curiosity gets suppressed. Desire gets rationalized away. Over time, you may feel bored, restless, or disconnected without knowing why. You're protecting an identity that no longer serves you. The cost shows up in missed possibilities. Life keeps offering paths that require you to become someone new, but identity says no before experience gets a chance. Growth requires flexibility, not consistency of self-image. Letting identity dictate choices doesn't keep you grounded. It freezes you in place, forcing your future to answer to a past version of who you thought you were. Using abstraction to avoid vulnerability. Using abstraction to avoid vulnerability is a trap where ideas replace honesty and concepts replace feelings. Instead of speaking from lived experience, you retreat into theory, generalizations, and big-picture language. You don't say how something hurt you, you discuss the dynamics behind it. You don't admit fear, you analyze human behavior. Abstraction becomes a way to stay intellectually present while emotionally hidden. This trap forms because vulnerability feels dangerous. It exposes uncertainty, need, and emotional risk. Abstraction feels safer. It elevates the conversation, creates distance, and protects you from being seen too clearly. You sound thoughtful, composed, and intelligent, but nothing personal is actually at stake. The self stays protected behind ideas. Emotionally, this creates disconnection. You talk about life instead of from it. Relationships feel shallow even when conversations are deep. People hear your thoughts but never fully meet you. Over time, you begin to feel unseen, not realizing that you're the one withholding access. Abstraction keeps you impressive but unreachable. The danger is subtle because abstraction looks like insight. You believe you're being open because you're sharing perspectives, but vulnerability requires specificity. It requires naming feelings, admitting confusion, and risking judgment. Without that, emotional intimacy can't form, and growth stays theoretical. Using abstraction avoids pain in the short term, but it also avoids connection, healing, and trust. Life doesn't respond to concepts, it responds to honesty. When abstraction replaces vulnerability, you stay safe, articulate, and alone, while the deeper work waits patiently beneath the surface, untouched. Confusing speed of thought with depth of action. Confusing speed of thought with depth of action is a trap that makes mental sharpness feel like progress. Ideas come quickly, insights form rapidly, and conclusions appear almost instantly. This mental speed feels powerful, even superior, but fast thinking doesn't automatically translate into meaningful movement, and mistaking one for the other quietly stalls growth. This trap works because thinking is clean and controlled, while action is messy and uncertain. When thoughts move quickly, you feel ahead, as if you've already done the work. The brain rewards this sensation, creating the illusion that insight itself carries weight. But depth isn't measured by how fast you understand something. It's measured by how deeply you apply it over time. Emotionally, this creates a disconnect. You feel capable, yet unfulfilled. You know what to do, sometimes immediately, but that knowledge never hardens into behavior. Each unacted insight adds pressure. You begin questioning why, despite your mental clarity, your life doesn't reflect it. Speed becomes a hiding place from effort. The deeper damage is shallow execution. Depth of action requires patience, repetition, and endurance. It's built slowly, through friction and follow-through. Fast thoughts can spark direction, but only sustained action creates change. When speed of thought is mistaken for depth, intelligence outruns discipline, and potential stays trapped in the mind, impressive but unused, while real progress waits for movement that never comes. Believing awareness alone creates change. Believing awareness alone creates change is a trap that feels enlightened but keeps behavior frozen. Awareness feels powerful. Naming patterns, recognizing trauma, and understanding motivations create a sense of clarity and relief. Once you see the issue, it feels like something has shifted, but awareness without action is insight without impact. This trap works because awareness reduces guilt. If you understand why you behave a certain way, you feel less responsible for changing it. The mind treats insight as progress, rewarding itself for recognition rather than correction. You become fluent in your own psychology, able to explain every habit and flaw while continuing to repeat them unchanged. Emotionally, this creates a subtle contradiction. You feel self-aware, yet stuck, informed, yet frustrated. You know what's happening, but knowing doesn't translate into doing. Over time, awareness becomes a comforting loop, something you revisit instead of something you build upon. It feels safer to observe yourself than to confront the discomfort of altering behavior. The deeper danger is stagnation disguised as growth. Real change requires friction, repetition, and discomfort. Awareness is only the starting point. Without deliberate action, it becomes another place to hide. Understanding why you're stuck doesn't free you from being stuck. It only sharpens the pain of watching yourself stay there while believing you should be moving forward by now. Avoiding environments that challenge status. Avoiding environments that challenge status is a trap driven by the need to feel competent, respected, and secure. You gravitate towards spaces where you already know the rules, where your position is comfortable, and where your abilities are rarely questioned. Anything that might lower your standing feels risky, so you quietly stay away from it. This trap works because status feels like safety. Being seen as capable, knowledgeable, or important protects the ego. But growth environments strip that comfort away. They place you among people who are better, faster, or more advanced, forcing you into humility. Instead of seeing this as opportunity, the mind interprets it as threat. Emotionally, this creates stagnation masked as confidence. You feel steady, but not expanding. Validation replaces challenge, and familiarity replaces progress. Over time, boredom sets in, followed by subtle insecurity, because deep down, you know you're no longer being tested. Comfort starts to feel hollow. The real cost is invisible until it compounds. skills plateau, perspective narrows, ambition softens, status feels preserved, but growth quietly stops. Environments that challenge you don't diminish you. They reveal what you're capable of becoming. Avoiding them keeps your position intact, but at the price of your potential, trading expansion for the temporary comfort of staying impressive instead of becoming stronger. Overthinking. Social perception. Overthinking social perception is a trap where attention turns inward and every interaction becomes a performance under imagined scrutiny. Instead of being present, you monitor yourself constantly, replaying words, gestures, and expressions in your head. You're no longer participating in the moment, you're managing how the moment might be judged. This trap forms from the desire to be accepted and respected. The mind convinces you that if you think hard enough about how you're coming across, you can prevent rejection. But this hyper-awareness backfires. The more you analyze yourself, the less natural you become. Authentic responses are replaced by calculated ones, and connection gives way to self-surveillance. Emotionally, this creates anxiety and exhaustion. Every social situation feels draining because you're carrying an invisible audience with you. Afterward, you replay conversations, searching for mistakes that may not exist. Confidence erodes because your sense of self becomes dependent on imagined opinions rather than internal grounding. Over time, this habit shrinks expression. You speak less, share less, and take fewer social risks. You become agreeable instead of honest, polished instead of real. The irony is that people connect more with presence than perfection, but overthinking keeps you chasing approval instead of offering authenticity. When social perception dominates attention, you lose the ability to feel at ease in your own skin. You become an observer of yourself rather than a participant in life, and the freedom that comes from being fully present is quietly replaced by constant, unnecessary self-judgment, preferring cleverness over effectiveness. Preferring cleverness over effectiveness is a trap that makes being impressive feel more important than being useful. Clever ideas, sharp wording, and elegant solutions satisfy the ego. They signal intelligence and originality. Effectiveness, by contrast, is often simple, repetitive, and unglamorous. It works, but it doesn't always sparkle. This trap works because cleverness is immediately rewarding. You receive admiration for sounding smart even before anything is proven. Effectiveness demands patience. It requires testing, adjusting, and sometimes doing the same thing again and again without applause. So the mind leans toward what looks good instead of what actually delivers results. Emotionally, this creates misalignment. You start designing actions to be admired rather than to succeed. You avoid straightforward solutions because they feel boring or obvious. Over time, results lag behind self-image. You feel capable and articulate, yet outcomes remain underwhelming. The gap between how smart something sounds and how well it works becomes a source of quiet frustration. The deeper cost is lost impact. The world doesn't reward cleverness unless it produces results. Most progress comes from methods that aren't novel, just consistently applied. When cleverness becomes the goal, execution becomes secondary. You end up polishing ideas instead of proving them. Effectiveness doesn't flatter the ego, but it changes reality. And when reality doesn't change, no amount of cleverness can hide it. Using intelligence to justify comfort. Using intelligence to justify comfort is a trap where clever reasoning becomes a permission slip to stay exactly where you are. You can explain why pushing harder isn't necessary, why rest is deserved, why ambition can wait. Your arguments are polished, logical, and convincing, especially to yourself. Comfort doesn't look like avoidance anymore. It looks like balance, self-care, or strategic restraint. This trap works because intelligence is excellent at storytelling. It can turn fear into prudence and laziness into sustainability. You don't say you're avoiding discomfort, you say you're being realistic about your limits. You frame stagnation as contentment and convince yourself that wanting more is immature or ego-driven. The mind creates narratives that protect ease while sounding wise. Emotionally, this creates a dull heaviness. Life feels calm but flat. You're not unhappy enough to change, but not fulfilled enough to feel alive. Over time, comfort becomes addictive. Any challenge feels unnecessary. Any discomfort feels excessive. You begin optimizing for peace instead of growth, not realizing that meaning often lives on the other side of strain. The real cost is slow erosion. Potential fades quietly when it isn't tested. Confidence weakens when effort is avoided. Intelligence was meant to expand your life, not shrink it into a perfectly reasoned routine. When comfort becomes the goal and intelligence becomes its defense, you don't fail dramatically. You simply settle thoughtfully, convincingly, and far below what you were capable of becoming. Avoiding clear commitments. Avoiding clear commitments is a trap that keeps life permanently unfinished. You keep things vague, open-ended, and flexible, telling yourself you're staying adaptable. Decisions are delayed, promises are softened, and paths are left undefined so nothing ever fully locks into place. It feels safe because commitment creates stakes. This trap works by protecting you from consequence. The moment you commit, you can fail, disappoint, or be judged. By staying ambiguous, you preserve potential without having to test it. As long as nothing is clearly chosen, nothing can clearly go wrong, but nothing can clearly go right either. Emotionally, this creates a lingering unease. You feel busy and involved, yet strangely unanchored. There's always something pending, something unresolved. Confidence weakens because self-trust is built through follow-through. Each avoided commitment quietly reinforces the belief that you can't be relied on, even by yourself. Over time, life starts making decisions for you. Opportunities disappear, relationships stall, and momentum fades. Flexibility turns into drift. Clear commitments don't trap you, they focus you. Avoiding them doesn't keep your options open. It keeps your life suspended, where nothing fully begins, nothing fully ends, and progress remains just out of reach. Treating effort as a sign of weakness. Treating effort as a sign of weakness is a trap rooted in the belief that real ability should look effortless. You begin to associate struggle with inadequacy and ease with competence. The moment something requires sustained effort, it feels like evidence that you're not naturally good enough, so you pull back to protect your image. This trap forms in environments that glorify talent over practice. You internalize the idea that if you were truly capable, things would come easily. Effort becomes something to hide rather than embrace. You stop pushing when it gets hard, not because you can't continue, but because continuing would expose vulnerability. Emotionally, this creates fragility. You only feel confident when conditions are favorable. The moment resistance appears, doubt floods in. You abandon challenges early, convincing yourself they're not for you. Over time, this shrinks your range of experiences and limits growth, all while preserving the illusion of competence. The cost compounds quietly. Skills remain shallow because depth requires sustained effort. Confidence stays conditional because it hasn't been tested. You begin avoiding arenas where effort would be visible, choosing safety over expansion. What looks like self-respect is often fear in disguise. Effort is not weakness, it is proof of engagement. Treating it as failure robs you of resilience and momentum. Strength is built through persistence in discomfort, and when effort is rejected, growth stalls before it ever has a chance to take root. Believing talent should feel effortless. Believing talent should feel effortless is a trap that turns struggle into self-doubt. You assume that if something is truly meant for you, it should come naturally, without friction or resistance. When effort appears, you interpret it as a sign that you're not talented enough, not built for it, or forcing the wrong path. This trap works by romanticizing ability. You compare your behind-the-scenes effort to other people's polished outcomes and conclude that they're gifted while you're flawed. What you don't see is their repetition, frustration, and persistence. Effort is invisible once mastery forms, but you mistake invisibility for absence. Emotionally, this creates discouragement. The moment work becomes hard, you question yourself instead of the process. You pull back just as growth is beginning. Over time, you abandon skills prematurely, not because you lack ability, but because effort made you uncomfortable. You start chasing things that feel easy instead of building what matters. The deeper damage is a distorted relationship with growth. Real talent is developed, not discovered. Effort isn't evidence of inadequacy. It's proof that capacity is expanding. When you believe talent should feel effortless, you quit too early and label it intuition. But intuition doesn't avoid effort, it survives it. And when effort is mistaken for failure, potential never gets the chance to harden into skill. Intellectual detachment from consequences. Intellectual detachment from consequences is a trap where thinking replaces feeling and abstraction replaces responsibility. You analyze situations from a distance, turning real outcomes into concepts, probabilities, or thought experiments. This emotional distance feels sophisticated and controlled, but it slowly disconnects you from the weight of your own choices. This trap works by dulling urgency. When consequences are treated as ideas rather than realities, their impact feels remote. You can discuss risks, trade-offs, and outcomes without truly feeling them. The mind stays calm because nothing feels personal. Decisions become theoretical, and responsibility feels negotiable rather than immediate. Emotionally, this creates numbness mixed with regret. You don't feel much in the moment, but the cost shows up later when consequences arrive without the buffer of abstraction. Relationships strain because empathy requires presence, not analysis. Opportunities fade because delay feels harmless when outcomes aren't emotionally real. The deeper danger is disconnection from life itself. Growth requires feeling the feedback loop between action and outcome. When you detach intellectually, you rob yourself of that loop. Mistakes don't teach, success doesn't satisfy, and lessons don't stick. Intelligence becomes a barrier instead of a guide. By staying above the consequences, you avoid discomfort in the short term, but you also avoid ownership, depth, and the emotional engagement that turns decisions into meaningful progress. Avoiding ownership by blaming systems. Avoiding ownership by blaming systems is a trap that shifts responsibility outward while leaving your power behind. You point to structures, environments, unfair rules, or broken systems as the reason things haven't changed. While many systems are flawed, this trap turns explanation into escape, allowing you to feel justified without being effective. This trap works because blame offers relief. It protects self-image and softens guilt. If the system is the problem, then effort feels pointless and failure feels rational. But the cost of this relief is agency. Each time responsibility is outsourced, your influence over your own life quietly shrinks. Emotionally, this creates resentment mixed with helplessness. You feel aware but constrained, informed but stuck. Anger simmers because nothing improves, yet action feels futile. Over time, this mindset hardens into identity. You become someone who sees the flaws everywhere, but feels powerless to move within them. Ownership doesn't mean denying injustice or pretending obstacles don't exist. It means recognizing where your control still lives. Blaming systems may explain why something is hard, but it never explains why you can't respond. Avoiding ownership protects you from discomfort, but it also disconnects you from the only place real change ever starts. Confusing doubt with sophistication. Confusing doubt with sophistication is a trap where hesitation is mistaken for depth and certainty is seen as naive. You begin to believe that questioning everything makes you smarter, more nuanced, more evolved. Confidence starts to look reckless while doubt feels refined. Over time, uncertainty becomes a personality trait rather than a temporary state. This trap forms because doubt feels safer than belief. If you never fully commit to an idea, a direction, or a stance, you can't be fully wrong. Skepticism creates distance from failure and shields you from criticism. You learn to poke holes in possibilities instead of building them, convincing yourself that restraint equals intelligence. Emotionally, this creates quiet paralysis. You're always aware of what might go wrong, but rarely energized by what could go right. Enthusiasm feels embarrassing, so you keep it muted. Passion becomes tempered, then replaced by irony and detachment. The world feels flat because nothing is allowed to matter too much. Over time, people confuse your hesitation for wisdom, reinforcing the pattern. But inside, momentum dies. You stop trusting your instincts and delay decisions until they lose relevance. Life doesn't reward perfect skepticism, it rewards engagement. Doubt has its place, but when it becomes a badge of sophistication, it drains vitality. True depth comes from choosing despite uncertainty. When doubt replaces conviction, you stay mentally sharp but emotionally distant, watching life unfold while convincing yourself you're above the risk of caring. Waiting to eliminate risk. Waiting to eliminate risk is a trap that makes hesitation feel responsible. You tell yourself you're being careful, thorough, and strategic. You believe that if you can just reduce uncertainty a little more, the next step will be safe. Risk feels like something to solve before acting, not something to accept while moving. This trap works because certainty feels comforting. The brain craves predictability, and eliminating risk sounds like control. But risk is not a problem to be solved, it's a condition of action. The longer you wait for safety, the more action feels dangerous. Each delay reinforces the belief that movement without guarantees is reckless. Emotionally, this creates anxiety disguised as caution. You replay scenarios, anticipate failures, and look for reassurance that never fully arrives. Over time, confidence erodes, not because you failed, but because you never tested yourself. The unknown grows larger in your mind the longer you avoid it. The deeper cost is lost timing. Opportunities don't wait for certainty. They reward those willing to move while things are unclear. Growth happens in uncertainty, not after it disappears. When you wait to eliminate risk, you trade learning for illusionary safety. Life doesn't become safer with waiting, it becomes smaller. And by the time risk feels acceptable, the moment to act has often already passed. Avoiding feedback loops. Avoiding feedback loops is a trap that keeps you protected from discomfort while quietly blocking growth. Feedback is information from reality, and reality is rarely gentle. It reflects mistakes, exposes blind spots, and challenges self-perception. By avoiding feedback, you preserve a version of yourself that feels competent and in control, even if it isn't accurate. This trap works by framing feedback as optional or unnecessary. You tell yourself you already know how you're doing, or that external input is biased, uninformed, or premature. The mind prefers internal validation because it's predictable and safe. Without feedback, effort feels less risky, but it also becomes less effective. Emotionally, this creates stagnation disguised as stability. You don't feel challenged, but you also don't feel sharpened. Small errors repeat because nothing interrupts them. Progress slows because adjustments never happen. Over time, confidence becomes fragile, not because you lack ability, but because it hasn't been tested against reality. The deeper cost is lost alignment with truth. Feedback loops are how systems improve, and you are a system. Without them, you drift. You might feel busy, even dedicated, but direction becomes guesswork. Avoiding feedback protects the ego in the short term, but it steals growth in the long term. Without honest signals from the outside, you end up perfecting behaviors that no longer serve you, wondering why effort no longer leads anywhere meaningful. Treating self-improvement as theory Treating self-improvement as theory is a trap that keeps growth safely confined to ideas. You consume frameworks, concepts, and philosophies about becoming better, thinking deeply about change without ever embodying it. Improvement becomes something you understand rather than something you practice. This trap works because theory feels clean and controlled. It allows you to stay in your head, where everything makes sense. Action is messy. It exposes inconsistency, weakness, and failure. By keeping self-improvement intellectual, you protect yourself from the discomfort of actually changing how you behave when it matters. Emotionally, this creates a frustrating split. You know what you should do, yet you don't do it. You speak the language of growth but live the same patterns. Over time, this gap erodes self-respect. You start doubting yourself, not because you lack insight, but because insight hasn't translated into evidence. Self-improvement only becomes real when it's tested under pressure, repeated when it's inconvenient, and applied when it's uncomfortable. Treating it as theory keeps growth abstract and safe, allowing you to feel advanced without being transformed. Knowledge explains the path, but walking it requires commitment. Without that, improvement remains an idea that never reaches your life. Overvaluing insight over habit. Overvaluing insight over habit is a trap that makes realization feel like resolution. The moment something clicks, the mind experiences relief as if the problem has been solved. Insight feels powerful, almost transformative, because it changes how you see things. But seeing differently doesn't automatically mean living differently, and that gap is where this trap quietly takes hold. This pattern forms because insight is dramatic and habits are dull. A realization can happen in an instant and feels meaningful. Habits require repetition, patience, and discipline without emotional payoff. So the mind celebrates awareness and postpones routine. You tell yourself you'll act differently now that you understand, but nothing concrete is put in place. Emotionally, this creates frustration masked as growth. You feel enlightened but unchanged. Each insight raises expectations, and each unchanged habit erodes confidence. You begin to wonder why understanding so much hasn't translated into progress. The disappointment isn't loud, but it's persistent. Over time, insight becomes a substitute for action. You chase breakthroughs instead of building systems. You wait for another realization to fix what only consistency can. Habits, not insights, shape daily behavior, but they don't feel impressive enough to prioritize. Insight opens the door, but habit decides whether you walk through it. When insight is valued more than repetition, growth stays theoretical, and the life you imagine never fully materializes in the routines you avoid building. Using intelligence to explain stagnation. Using intelligence to explain stagnation is a trap that turns self-awareness into a defense mechanism. You can articulate exactly why you're stuck. You understand the systems, the context, the limitations, and the psychology behind your behavior. Your explanations are accurate, layered, and convincing, and because they make sense, they quietly replace change. This trap works by making stagnation feel justified. Instead of confronting the discomfort of action, you analyze it away. You explain why timing isn't right, why conditions matter, why the system is flawed, or why your situation is uniquely complex. Each explanation reduces urgency. Each insight becomes another reason not to move. Emotionally, this creates a strange calm mixed with frustration. You feel intelligent and trapped at the same time. You know more than enough to change, yet nothing shifts. Over time, these explanations harden into identity. Being aware becomes who you are, and trying becomes something for people who don't see the full picture like you do. The deeper damage is slow self-betrayal. Intelligence was meant to guide action, not excuse its absence. When explanations replace effort, growth becomes theoretical. Life stays the same while your understanding deepens, and that contrast becomes painful. Knowing why you're stuck doesn't free you, only movement does. And when intelligence is used to justify stillness, it quietly turns into a cage built from insight. Avoiding mundane execution. Avoiding mundane execution is a trap that makes progress feel beneath you. The repetitive, unglamorous work required to turn ideas into reality feels dull, mechanical, and uninspiring. You tell yourself you're waiting for better leverage, smarter systems, or more meaningful tasks, but what you're really avoiding is the boredom that real progress demands. This trap works because mundane execution offers no immediate emotional reward. It doesn't feel clever, it doesn't feel impressive. There's nothing exciting about showing up consistently to do small, ordinary tasks. The mind craves stimulation, so it drifts toward planning, optimizing, or rethinking instead of doing what actually moves things forward. Emotionally, this creates a growing sense of frustration and self-betrayal. You know what needs to be done, but you keep circling around it. Ideas pile up while results remain scarce. Over time, you start doubting your discipline, not realizing the real issue is your resistance to boredom, not lack of ability. The deeper cost is stalled momentum. Most meaningful outcomes are built through mundane execution repeated over time. By avoiding it, you delay results and weaken self-trust. Progress doesn't come from dramatic moments, but from quiet consistency. When you reject the mundane, you reject the pathway through which effort compounds, and life remains full of potential with nothing concrete to show for it. Confusing awareness with growth. Confusing awareness with growth is a trap that makes you feel evolved while keeping your life unchanged. You notice your patterns, recognize your triggers, and understand your flaws with impressive clarity. That awareness brings relief, even pride, because you feel conscious rather than reactive. But noticing something is not the same as changing it. This trap works because awareness reduces guilt. Once you can explain why you behave a certain way, the behavior feels more acceptable. You become fluent in your own psychology, able to describe your limitations without confronting them. Insight becomes a resting place instead of a starting point. Emotionally, this creates stagnation disguised as progress. You feel informed but stuck, awake but unmoving. Each repeated pattern carries extra weight because now you know better. Frustration builds as self-knowledge grows without self-control. Awareness turns into a loop where you watch yourself repeat the same behaviors with increasing clarity and decreasing hope. Growth requires friction. It demands choosing differently in real time, especially when old habits feel easier. Awareness simply shines a light. It doesn't move your feet. Confusing the two keeps you mentally sharp and emotionally trapped, observing your life from a distance while calling it development, waiting for understanding to somehow become change on its own. Needing to fully understand before starting. Needing to fully understand before starting is a trap that convinces you preparation must come before movement. You tell yourself that acting without complete clarity would be irresponsible, that once everything makes sense, action will be easier and more effective. But this demand for understanding quietly delays momentum and turns learning into a barrier. This trap feeds on the fear of mistakes. If you don't start, you can't fail. The mind frames hesitation as diligence, even though most understanding is only earned through doing. You wait to feel confident, not realizing confidence is built through exposure, correction, and repetition. Clarity is expected up front, even though it usually arrives after action begins. Emotionally, this creates stagnation paired with restlessness. You feel the urge to move, but hold yourself back with questions that can't be answered in advance. Each delay reinforces the belief that you're not ready yet. Over time, starting feels heavier because expectations have grown unrealistically high. The danger is subtle because learning feels productive. You gather information, watch others, and think through scenarios. But without action, knowledge stays abstract and fragile. Reality remains intimidating because you've never tested yourself against it. Understanding doesn't precede action. It evolves from it. When you demand certainty before starting, you trap yourself in endless preparation, while those willing to begin imperfectly gain the very understanding you're waiting for. Avoiding visible failure. Avoiding visible failure is a trap built on fear of judgment and the need to protect image. Failing privately feels tolerable, but failing where others can see feels unbearable. You imagine the looks, the opinions, the quiet conclusions people might draw about your competence, so you hesitate, delay, or avoid situations where failure would be exposed. This trap works by tying worth to appearance. You begin prioritizing how you're perceived over what you're capable of becoming. Safe choices feel better than honest attempts. You wait until success feels likely, not realizing that visible failure is often the price of real growth. The more public the risk, the heavier the hesitation becomes. Emotionally, this creates restraint. You censor your ambition, lower your reach, and choose paths that minimize embarrassment rather than maximize learning. Over time, confidence shrinks because confidence is built by surviving failure, not hiding from it. Each avoided risk reinforces the belief that exposure is dangerous. The deeper cost is invisibility. You can't build credibility, skill, or resilience in hiding. Every meaningful achievement carries a trail of public missteps behind it. When you avoid visible failure, you avoid visible progress too. Life doesn't reward those who never fall, it rewards those who get back up in full view. And when fear keeps failure private, it also keeps potential unseen. Treating life as rehearsal. Treating life as rehearsal is a trap that keeps you emotionally suspended, always preparing for a moment that never fully arrives. You live as if the real version of your life is just ahead, telling yourself this phase is for learning, adjusting, and getting ready. Mistakes don't count yet, risks can wait, and commitment feels premature because you believe the real performance hasn't started. This trap works by postponing consequence. If this is only rehearsal, then choices don't need full ownership. You can delay decisions, soften effort, and avoid fully showing up without feeling like you're losing anything important. The mind finds comfort in this mindset because it removes finality. Nothing feels permanent, so nothing feels urgent. Emotionally, this creates a persistent sense of incompleteness. You're present, but not invested, engaged, but holding back. You don't fully commit to relationships, goals, or paths because you're waiting for a future version of yourself who will do it for real. Over time, this creates quiet regret because days pass and the promised moment of readiness never arrives. The deeper danger is disconnection from meaning. Meaning comes from stakes, from acting as if what you do matters now. When life is treated as rehearsal, effort becomes tentative, and identity stays fluid in an unhealthy way. You never fully inhabit your choices, so nothing fully shapes you in return. Life doesn't announce when rehearsal ends. It only rewards those who decide to step on stage while the lights are already on. Overestimating how special your case is. Overestimating how special your case is a trap that quietly exempts you from doing the work. You believe your circumstances, personality, past, or complexity make you the exception. The rules that apply to others feel too simple, too generic, too shallow to fit you, so you wait for a solution that's uniquely tailored to your situation. This trap works because it protects ego and postpones responsibility. If your case is special, then standard advice doesn't apply, and delay feels justified. You become the protagonist of an unusually complex story where progress requires extraordinary conditions. Meanwhile, the basic actions that actually drive change are dismissed as insufficient. Emotionally, this creates isolation. You feel misunderstood, separate, and alone in your struggle. Comparison becomes frustrating because others seem to move forward with tools that wouldn't work for you. But this belief quietly traps you because growth is built on fundamentals repeated consistently, not on rare breakthroughs. The painful truth is that most human change follows predictable patterns. Sleep, discipline, repetition, honesty, and effort work whether your story feels unique or not. Overestimating how special your case is doesn't make you deeper. It keeps you stuck, waiting for a perfect explanation while ignoring the simple actions that have moved countless others forward before you. Preferring critique over creation. Preferring critique over creation is a trap where analysis feels safer than expression. Pointing out flaws, offering opinions, and dissecting others' work provides a sense of superiority without exposure. You stay intellectually engaged while avoiding the vulnerability that comes with putting something of your own into the world. This trap forms because creation carries risk. When you create, you can be judged, misunderstood, or ignored. Critique keeps you on the sidelines, where mistakes belong to someone else. The mind convinces you that your standards are simply high, that you're discerning, thoughtful, and selective, but often restraint hides fear. Emotionally, this creates distance from purpose. You see what's wrong everywhere, but never experience the satisfaction of building something right. Over time, critique sharpens while courage dulls. You become fluent in what doesn't work and increasingly hesitant to test what might. The irony is that critique requires less commitment than creation. You don't have to finish anything, defend it, or improve it. You never have to face the gap between intention and execution. Meanwhile, those who create learn through failure and iteration, growing faster despite imperfections. Preferring critique protects you from embarrassment, but it also protects you from growth. Insight without expression becomes stagnant. Life rewards those who risk being seen. When critique replaces creation, your voice stays sharp but silent, and the work you could have made exists only as commentary on what others dared to try. Avoiding accountability through complexity. Avoiding accountability through complexity is a trap that makes responsibility disappear behind explanations. When outcomes aren't clear, ownership becomes optional. You surround decisions with layers of context, nuance, and systems until it's hard to tell where responsibility actually lives. The more complex the story, the easier it is to step out of the spotlight. This trap works because complexity diffuses blame. If many factors are involved, no single person has to answer for the result. You talk about circumstances, structures, timing, and external forces, all of which may be real, but none of which require you to act differently. Complexity becomes a shield that protects the ego from uncomfortable self-examination. Emotionally, this creates distance from agency. You feel informed but powerless, aware but detached. Over time, this erodes confidence because confidence comes from knowing your actions matter. When everything feels too complex to influence, effort starts to feel pointless. You stop expecting change because you've convinced yourself the system is too tangled to move. The deeper damage is stagnation disguised as realism. Accountability simplifies things. It draws a clear line between action and outcome. Complexity muddies that line until nothing is demanded of you. Life doesn't require perfect understanding to respond, it requires ownership. When complexity replaces accountability, intelligence becomes avoidance, and progress dissolves into explanations that never ask anything of you. Mistaking intelligence for discipline. Mistaking intelligence for discipline is a trap that convinces you that knowing what to do is the same as doing it. You understand the systems, the strategies, the habits that lead to success. You can explain them clearly, even teach them to others. This creates the illusion that execution is inevitable, that action will naturally follow understanding. It rarely does. This trap works because intelligence feels powerful. It gives you language, clarity, and confidence. Discipline, on the other hand, is quiet and uncomfortable. It shows up when motivation disappears and when thinking offers no reward. By confusing the two, the mind assumes it can think its way into consistency, avoiding the friction that discipline requires. Emotionally, this creates a sharp internal contradiction. You know better, yet you don't act better. Each lapse feels heavier because ignorance can no longer be blamed. Over time, self-trust erodes. You begin questioning your character rather than your habits, wondering why insight doesn't translate into reliability. The deeper cost is stalled potential. Discipline is built through repetition, not insight. Intelligence can guide direction, but it cannot carry effort. When intelligence replaces discipline, progress becomes sporadic and fragile. You move in bursts of understanding instead of steady action. The gap between what you know and what you do becomes a source of quiet shame, and the life you imagined stays theoretical instead of lived. Waiting for clarity instead of creating it. Waiting for clarity instead of creating it is a trap that convinces you confusion is a signal to pause. You tell yourself you'll act once things make sense, once the path feels obvious, once uncertainty fades. Until then, you stay still, believing movement without clarity would be irresponsible or premature. This trap works because clarity feels like safety. Acting without it feels risky, like stepping into the dark. But clarity rarely arrives in advance. It's formed through motion, feedback, and correction. By waiting, you remain stuck in the very fog you're hoping will lift. Stillness doesn't sharpen understanding, it preserves confusion. Emotionally, this creates frustration and self-doubt. You feel capable but blocked, aware but unsure. Each delay reinforces the belief that you're missing something essential, when in reality, what's missing is experience. The longer you wait, the heavier decisions feel, and the harder it becomes to move at all. Clarity is not a prerequisite for action, it's a byproduct of it. Life reveals itself through engagement, not contemplation. Waiting for clarity keeps you trapped in analysis, watching possibilities instead of testing them. By refusing to move until the path is visible, you ensure it never fully appears. Letting thoughts replace actions. Letting thoughts replace actions is a trap where internal activity becomes a substitute for real movement. You think intensely about what you should do, imagine outcomes, replay scenarios, and mentally rehearse change. The mind stays busy, convincing you that effort is being made, even though nothing external shifts. This trap forms because thinking feels safer than acting. Thoughts have no consequences. They don't risk failure, rejection, or discomfort. You can explore endless possibilities without committing to any of them. Over time, mental engagement begins to feel like progress, and action starts to feel unnecessary or delayed. Emotionally, this creates a strange fatigue. You're exhausted without having done anything. Frustration builds because your inner world is active while your outer world remains stagnant. Each unacted thought quietly weakens self-trust. You begin doubting your ability to follow through, even on small things. The danger is subtle because imagination is powerful. Visualizing change can feel satisfying enough to reduce urgency, but without action, thoughts lose weight. They become noise instead of direction. The gap between intention and reality widens, creating guilt and self-criticism. Thoughts are meant to guide behavior, not replace it. When action is postponed in favor of contemplation, life stays theoretical. Momentum dies in the mind, and the version of yourself who acts remains an idea rather than a lived reality. Confusing comfort with stability. Confusing comfort with stability is a trap that makes stagnation feel safe. When things are familiar and predictable, they feel secure, even if they're slowly draining you. Discomfort, on the other hand, feels threatening, so the mind equates ease with safety and tension with danger. What feels calm is assumed to be solid. This trap works because comfort reduces anxiety in the short term. Routine, familiarity, and known outcomes soothe the nervous system. But stability isn't about how relaxed you feel. It's about whether your situation can support growth, stress, and change. Comfort avoids disturbance. Stability survives it. Emotionally, this creates quiet decay. You settle into patterns that no longer challenge or fulfill you. telling yourself that at least things aren't falling apart. Over time, dissatisfaction grows, but it's muted by convenience. You stay because leaving would require effort, risk, and temporary chaos, even though staying costs you slowly. The deeper cost is fragility. Comfort without growth becomes brittle. The moment circumstances shift, the illusion of stability collapses. Real stability is built by facing discomfort, developing skills, and strengthening capacity. When comfort is mistaken for security, life feels peaceful until it suddenly isn't. And by then, the opportunity to build real stability has already been delayed too long. Believing smart people shouldn't struggle. Believing smart people shouldn't struggle is a trap that quietly poisons resilience. It plants the idea that difficulty is a sign of inadequacy, that if you were truly intelligent, things would come easier. When struggle appears, instead of seeing it as part of growth, you interpret it as evidence that something is wrong with you. This trap works by tying self-worth to ease. Intelligence becomes associated with smooth progress, quick understanding, and visible competence. When effort feels heavy or progress feels slow, shame creeps in. You start hiding the struggle, downplaying it, or abandoning the pursuit entirely, assuming it wasn't meant for you if it didn't feel natural. Emotionally, this creates isolation and self-doubt. You watch others push through difficulty and assume they're built differently, not realizing they're simply willing to struggle publicly. Every challenge feels personal, not situational. Instead of asking how to adapt, you ask what this says about you. Struggle becomes something to avoid rather than something to move through. The deepest damage is avoidance of mastery. All meaningful skills demand resistance, repetition, and frustration. By believing struggle shouldn't apply to you, you opt out the moment things get hard. Intelligence was never meant to eliminate struggle. It was meant to help you navigate it. When struggle is seen as failure instead of feedback, growth stalls, confidence shrinks, and potential quietly fades behind the belief that smart people were supposed to have it easier than this. Using intelligence to defend the status quo. Using intelligence to defend the status quo is a trap where sharp thinking becomes a shield against change. You can explain why things are the way they are, why alternatives won't work, and why now isn't the right time. Your reasoning is often accurate, nuanced, and convincing. That's what makes the trap so dangerous. This trap works because intelligence is excellent at justification. It can find flaws in every new idea, risks in every deviation, and logic in staying exactly where you are. Change threatens comfort, identity, and predictability, so the mind deploys arguments to keep everything stable. You don't resist change emotionally, you dismantle it intellectually. Emotionally, this creates quiet stagnation. You feel informed but unmoved, capable but inactive. Others may see you as realistic or cautious, while inside you sense a growing restlessness. You know more is possible, but every impulse toward change is met with a counterargument that sounds reasonable enough to stop you. Over time, intelligence becomes a cage. Instead of expanding your life, it reinforces existing patterns. Growth requires a willingness to look foolish, to act before certainty, and to risk being wrong. Using intelligence to defend the status quo keeps you mentally sophisticated but practically stuck, preserving comfort while slowly suffocating the possibility of becoming more. Choosing to stay stuck because it feels safe. Choosing to stay stuck because it feels safe is a trap rooted in familiarity, not satisfaction. Even when life feels stagnant, predictable discomfort can feel more tolerable than uncertain change. You know what staying costs you, but you don't know what leaving might cost, and the unknown feels more threatening than the pain you've learned to manage. This trap forms when safety becomes the highest value. Growth demands risk, exposure, and the possibility of failure. Staying where you are requires none of that. The mind reframes stagnation as patience, loyalty, or realism. You tell yourself it's not the right time, that things could be worse, that stability matters more than momentum. Slowly, staying still becomes justified. Emotionally, this creates quiet despair. Nothing is terribly wrong, but nothing is truly alive either. Days blur together. Ambition softens into resignation. You feel disconnected from your own potential, watching life pass while telling yourself you're being cautious. The pain is subtle, but it lingers. The danger is that safety calcifies. The longer you stay, the harder leaving feels. Confidence erodes because courage is never exercised. Options narrow because inaction closes doors without making noise. What once felt safe begins to feel suffocating. Stuckness isn't caused by lack of ability, but by fear disguised as comfort. Choosing safety over growth preserves the familiar, but it slowly trades away aliveness, leaving you protected, stable, and quietly unfulfilled. Confusing self-critique with self-improvement. Confusing self-critique with self-improvement is a trap that makes harsh inner dialogue feel productive. You constantly analyze your flaws, replay mistakes, and point out where you fall short. It feels like accountability. It feels like honesty. But criticism alone doesn't create change. It only creates pressure. This trap works because self-critique feels active. You're working on yourself by thinking about what's wrong. The mind believes that if it keeps pointing out failures, improvement will eventually follow. Instead, the inner voice becomes sharper, louder, and more unforgiving. Awareness turns into accusation, and motivation quietly collapses under its weight. Emotionally, this creates exhaustion and shame. You start associating growth with punishment. Every attempt is met with preemptive judgment, so trying feels dangerous. Over time, you hesitate to act because failure doesn't just mean a setback, it means another round of self-attack. Progress slows, not because you don't care, but because you're tired of being at war with yourself. The deeper damage is paralysis disguised as discipline. Real self-improvement requires compassion paired with action. It involves correcting course, not endlessly rehearsing faults. When self-critique replaces self-correction, insight becomes a weapon turned inward. You don't become better by tearing yourself down repeatedly. You become better by building, adjusting, and allowing yourself to grow without constant punishment.